I died in my sleep at 52 years old, in my apartment on the seventh floor of a building in Denver, on a Tuesday in March, in a life that had the shape of something correct and the weight of something resigned. The stroke came without warning. One moment the bedroom was dark and still. Then I simply was not in it. I know what I lost. I spent 18 years learning to carry the inventory. The house on Ridgecrest Road where I grew up, gone. My father's investment accounts, the watercolor collection he had built over 40 years of weekend mornings, the things that were not money but meant more than money. All of it went to Diane Fowler, who had been Raymond's wife for 2.5 years, and who had arranged in the deep hours of October 3rd for a notarized will amendment while my father lay in a hospital bed 12 hours before his hip surgery. Fentanyl for the pain, Ambien for sleep, a notary at Mimotmoy Bay PM, and two witnesses whose signatures I memorized a long time ago. I know the exact time. I know the notary's name. I know what the document said. I have known these details since I was 34 years old, and the knowing never changed a single thing. But when my eyes closed for the last time, they did not stay closed. I woke up at 34, October 6th, Denver. The first thing I registered was light, the thin pale gold of early October morning coming through curtains I recognized, in a bedroom I had not been 34 in for 18 years. The second thing was smell, auto-brewed coffee from the kitchen, the cedar of the closet door I always left open. My body felt strange in the way a body feels strange when you have been older, when you have lived in something that ached and stiffened and tired, and now you are suddenly back in something that doesn't. My hands on the sheets were smooth. The knuckle on my right middle finger, which had begun aching at 47, was quiet. I was 34 years old. My body confirmed this with a specificity that felt almost like an argument. I sat with this for a moment that felt both very long and very short. The ceiling of my Denver apartment. The particular quality of October morning light on it, flatter than summer, cooler at the edges. I had lived in this apartment for 8 years by this point in my life. I would eventually leave it for a smaller place that felt like a fresh start and turned out to be a lateral move, and then I would leave that place for the apartment on the seventh floor where I died in March, in a life that had quietly closed around the shape of everything I hadn't been able to change. But my father was alive. I knew this the way I knew everything now, not with the tentativeness of hope, but with the full weight of fact. Raymond James Ashworth, 71 years old, retired civil engineer, amateur watercolorist, the person who had loved me longest and most consistently of anyone I had ever known. He was alive, in Asheville, 2,600 miles east, and I knew what was going to happen to him if I did nothing. I knew about the amendment. I knew it the way you know something you have spent 18 years learning not to know, because the knowing and the inability to act had been the same condition for a very long time. The specific language of the document. I give, devise, and bequeath my entire estate, real and personal, to my beloved wife, Diane Elizabeth Fowler. The date stamp at the bottom, October Bamimotmoy by PM. The notary, Curtis Ellery of Ellery Notarial Services. The witnesses, Joanna Park and David Osey, whose names I had read in a probate attorney's office 6 weeks after my father died, sitting across a desk in a room with a window that looked out at a parking lot, understanding for the first time the specific shape of what had been done and how thoroughly it had been planned. I had learned all of this at 34. It had done me exactly no good. But I was 34 now, and none of it had happened yet. October 6th. I did not need to calculate. My father would be admitted to Asheville Memorial on October 8th for preoperative preparation. The surgery was October 10th, and sometime between the night of October 3rd and the morning of October 4th, 3 days ago in this life, Diane Fowler was going to walk into that hospital at Mimotmoy Bay PM with a document and two willing witnesses and a man with a notary seal. What she needed was simple. My father in a hospital bed, sedated for preoperative pain management, with his legal status as her husband giving her access to the room. A notary who was incurious or well compensated. Two witnesses who were the same. A document that a 71-year-old man with early cognitive change could be persuaded to sign without fully understanding its terms. What she did not need was me. My absence from Asheville had not been accidental. I understood this only in retrospect. The way the Edinburgh conference had fallen in precisely the window before the surgery. The way Diane had been gently, consistently supportive of my professional travel in the 2 years before my father died. The way she had mentioned twice that Raymond wouldn't want me to put my career aside for him, that she would be there. She was always there. I had taken this as kindness. I had taken most of what Diane did as kindness, for reasons I have examined carefully and that do not change the outcome. She had planned for my absence. Without it, the midnight notarization became considerably more complicated. She was not going to have my absence this time. There was something else I knew, something I had been able to construct only from records and conversations gathered years after the fact. That if the will amendment never happened, if Diane was stopped or circumvented or simply unable to execute what she had been building toward, then my father would come through the hip surgery and live for 3 more years. He would walk with a cane. He would paint watercolors of the mountains he had always meant to visit. He would call me on Tuesday evenings because Tuesdays were when I tended to work late, and he worried about me eating properly. He would live to 74, and he would die of the same pulmonary condition that had killed him at 71, only more slowly, with more warning, with time enough to say what needed to be said. I had not been there for his death in my first life because I had been on a plane. I had not been there for his last 3 years because I had been in Denver, building a career that felt like the right thing to prioritize, in a life that had slowly closed around itself. I was going to be there this time, for all of it. That was the plan, insofar as I had one, not just to stop what Diane was going to do, but to be present for what came after. In 4 days, I could be in Asheville. In 4 days, I could sit across from Philip Garrett, my father's estate attorney, and confirm in writing that the original will remained his clear and considered intention. In 4 days, I could find an elder law attorney who would formally evaluate my father's cognitive capacity and put that evaluation on record, so that any subsequent amendment would require documentation that could not be produced at Muimotmui Bay PM by two people Diane had brought herself. Diane could arrive at the hospital on October 3rd with her notary and her witnesses and her carefully prepared document. She could do everything exactly as she had planned. The notary waiting at the desk would not be hers. I reached for my phone. My father, Raymond James Ashworth, was 71 years old when he died. He was a civil engineer by training, a watercolor painter by avocation, and a man who had, for the last 3 years of his life, been slowly diminishing in ways that the doctors called natural and that I called heartbreaking. The hip, the cognition, the way he sometimes looked at me a half second too long before he placed my face, before he found my name, before he smiled and became himself again. He had met Diane at a grief support group, which is a detail I have never quite been able to process without complicated feelings. My mother had died of breast cancer when I was 19, and my father had grieved her quietly and thoroughly for 11 years. Then he had gone, at my Aunt Marjorie's gentle suggestion, to a grief support group at the Methodist Church on Merriman Avenue, and there he had met Diane Fowler, who had lost her husband to a sudden cardiac event 3 years prior, and who had, by all accounts I received secondhand, been very kind to him in the early months. He called me about her in March, 2 years before he died. He was careful about it. My father was always careful, explaining that he had a friend, that she was a nice woman, that he didn't want me to be surprised if her name came up. I told him I was glad he had a friend. I meant it. My father had spent 11 years being lonely in ways he tried to hide from me, and I was not going to be the daughter who made his late happiness into a problem. They married in June of that same year. A small ceremony. 14 people. I was maid of honor, which felt both entirely right and faintly surreal. Diane wore cream. My father wore the blue suit he'd bought for my mother's funeral and had never worn since, and I thought, that is love, wearing that suit again. I liked Diane. This is the part that takes the longest to explain. I did not distrust her. I did not feel the cold premonition of the woman in the Gothic novel who knows the stepmother is wrong. I thought she was reserved, perhaps a little formal with me, perhaps still calibrating the geometry of a relationship she hadn't expected to navigate. I thought she made my father laugh. I thought the house was cleaner when she was there. I thought, this is a good development, and you should be grateful for it. There was a specific moment, the Thanksgiving before they married, when I saw them in the kitchen together from the hallway, without them knowing I was there. My father was making the cranberry sauce, the kind from scratch, with orange zest, that he had made every year since my mother died because it was my mother's recipe, and he wanted to keep making it. He was stirring the pot, and Diane was at the counter chopping celery for something, and they were talking about something I couldn't hear, and my father laughed. The specific sound of my father laughing, a low, self-amused sound, not a performance laugh, the kind you make when something genuinely delights you. He hadn't made that sound in a long time. Years, maybe. I went back down the hallway and cried quietly in the bathroom for about 4 minutes. Not from sadness or not only. From something more complicated, the relief of seeing him happy again, mixed with the specific grief of a daughter who loves her father enough to want him to have something she can't fully give him herself, mixed with the awareness that the thing you can't give someone is being given to them by someone else. And all of those things together produce a feeling that doesn't have a clean name. I was grateful for Diane. I was genuinely grateful for her. This is the most important thing I want you to understand, because it changes the shape of what I felt when I discovered what she had done. It was not the confirmation of a suspicion. It was not the vindication of a wariness I had always secretly harbored. It was the specific quality of devastation that comes from having trusted something completely, and discovering the trust was wrong about something essential. I was in Edinburgh for a 5-day professional development conference for structural engineers. I had presented on Tuesday morning a paper on load distribution in bridge rehabilitation projects that I had spent 3 months preparing. The presentation had gone well. I was planning to take the Thursday afternoon train to Glasgow to see a friend before flying home Saturday. My father had hip surgery scheduled for the following Monday. Elective, or as elective as hip surgery becomes when a 71-year-old man can no longer walk the distance from his car to the grocery store without stopping twice. We had spoken about it the week before. He'd said, "Don't cut your trip short, Clary. It's just a hip. I'll see you when you're back." He called me Clary when he was being paternal and affectionate, which was most of the time. He died the Tuesday I landed. Not of the hip, a pulmonary embolism sudden in the early morning hours. The doctors said he had been symptomatic for several days. The swelling, the shortness of breath he'd mentioned to Diane as indigestion, and that they could not have predicted the severity. There is nothing more they could have done, they said. He did not suffer. I have sat with this information for 18 years. I have made a kind of uneasy peace with the medical facts. What I have never made peace with is what I came home to find waiting for me, filed and sealed, and already in the hands of a probate court while I was still on the plane. I arrived home on a Wednesday evening. Diane met me at the house. She had made food, a casserole of some kind, in the blue ceramic dish that had been my mother's. And there were people there, Aunt Marjorie, some of my father's colleagues from the engineering firm he'd retired from, Charlotte Reeves and her husband James, the neighbors from Ridgecrest Road. The house was full of people and food, and the specific quality of a gathering that exists at the precise point where loss is still too fresh to be grief and too present to be ignored, and everyone moves in the same soft, reduced manner, and the food sits on the counter being earnestly offered and gently refused. Diane was composed. She organized the food. She received condolences. She stood in the living room where my parents' wedding photograph was still on the mantel. She had not moved it, and she accepted the sympathy of people who loved my father, and she said the right things. I watched her across the room for an hour, and I thought, she is doing this correctly. And I thought, she loved him. And I thought both of these things without any suspicion of what was waiting for me in Philip Garrett's office. I sat with Aunt Marjorie in the kitchen for a long time that evening after most people had gone. The casserole was still on the counter. The kitchen had the yellow countertops and the ink stain on the table, and the window over the sink that looked out at the dark backyard. She called me, Marjorie said. "Diane?" The morning after he died. Before you landed, she held her coffee mug with both hands. She called to tell me. She was very kind about it. She has been kind, I said. Marjorie looked at me. Marjorie has always been the person in our family who looks at me when I don't know I need someone to look at me. "But," she said. "No but," I said. "I'm just tired." I was not just tired. I was the specific thing that comes before you know what the thing is, the presentiment of something. The place where instinct lives before knowledge arrives to justify it. I was standing at the threshold of an understanding that would take another 5 days and a meeting with Philip Garrett to become fully formed. And what I felt at that threshold was not suspicion, but a kind of negative space, the shape of something missing. I went to bed in my childhood bedroom. I left the door open. I could hear the house settling, the sound it has always made. The will had been revised 11 days before my father died. I learned this from the probate attorney, a gentle man named Philip Garrett, who had been my father's estate lawyer for 20 years, and who delivered the news with a grief on his face that I recognized, because it was the grief of someone who knows they are delivering information that will damage the person in front of them, and cannot find a way to soften it. The original will, the one my father had signed 12 years earlier after my mother's death, which left the estate in equal thirds between me, my Aunt Marjorie, and a small charitable foundation for water access in rural Appalachian communities, had been superseded. The revision was dated October 3rd, 11 days before he died. It had been notarized at 11:17 in the evening by a notary public named R. Simmons. It had been witnessed by 2 people. It had been prepared by an attorney named Derek Holloway, whose office was in a part of Raleigh I had never had occasion to visit. It left everything to Diane. The house in Asheville, $890,000. The commercial property in Raleigh, which my father had purchased 22 years ago and rented to a succession of small businesses, 1.4 million. The brokerage account, 342,000 plus accrued interest. Personal effects, vehicles, savings, all of it. Philip Garrett looked at me across his desk and said nothing for a moment, and I understood that he was giving me time. I used the time to look at the ceiling, which was white and water-stained in one corner. Then I looked back at him. When was he admitted to the hospital? I asked. He was admitted for observation on October 2nd, Philip said. A scheduled preoperative workup for the hip procedure. October 2nd. He was admitted on October 2nd. The will was signed on October 3rd, at 11:17 in the evening, while he was in a hospital bed on a preoperative pain management protocol that included fentanyl for a compression injury in his hip and Ambien for sleep. I looked at the ceiling again. I did not cry. I had been crying for 5 days. There was nothing left. Can this be challenged? I asked. Philip's face told me the answer before his words did. We can try, he said. The circumstances are, there are grounds to question. The timing, the medication protocol, the late hour of the notarization. But these proceedings are expensive. They are slow. And the burden of proof, he paused. The burden of proof is significant. I tried. I want to be clear that I tried. I hired an attorney, a good one. Her name was Jana Kowalski, and she was smart and thorough and did everything right. She was also honest with me from the first meeting about the slope we were on. The hardest part of these cases, she said, in her office on the second floor of a building on Marymount Avenue, 3 weeks after the will's existence became known to me, is that the burden of proof doesn't function the way most people expect. You're not trying to prove what happened. You're trying to prove what didn't happen, that your father's signature was not his free choice. And proving the absence of something is inherently more difficult than proving its presence. I understood this intellectually. Emotionally, I kept expecting that the facts would do more work, that the 11 p.m. timing, the medication protocol, the 8 months prior attorney retainer, the disappearance of the original will, that this body of circumstance would be legible to a court the way it was legible to me, sitting in Jana's office with the accumulation of it laid out on the conference table. It was not. Or rather, it was legible, and it was insufficient. There is a difference between a thing being evident and a thing being provable to the standard of a legal proceeding. And I learned this distinction in the most expensive and intimate way possible. We gathered the hospital records, the medication logs, the notarization record. We deposed Derek Holloway, who answered every question in precisely the minimum number of words and offered nothing that could be used. We looked for the original will, which had been in my father's fireproof safe at the house, and which was no longer there. Diane reported it had not been in the safe when she looked, that she didn't know anything about it. The case cost me $87,000 over 3 years. Jana was honest with me when the odds shifted. She was honest with me when the appeal was denied. She was honest with me on the phone call where she explained that there was nowhere else to go, that the court had found the revision to be legally executed, that the notarization had been performed by a licensed notary, that without the original will or witnesses to Raymond's stated contrary intent, there was nothing more we could do. There were 3 meetings in Jana's office that I can describe in granular detail, because I have turned them over many times, the way you turn over evidence looking for what you missed. The first was 6 weeks after the will became known to me. Jana had just received the deposition transcript from Derek Holloway. She walked me through it systematically, every answer he had given to every question, each one a closed door. He was representing a client who had requested his services. He had prepared the documents according to standard professional practice. He had ensured the necessary legal formalities were observed. He had no knowledge of the patient's medication protocol. That was not his professional purview. Each sentence was technically defensible. Each sentence was also a lie about what had actually happened, and the lie was protected by the truth of the sentences. He had, in the narrowest legal sense, done exactly what he described. Jana set the transcript on the table and said, "He's very good at this." "I know," I said. "The problem is that very good at this is what we need him to be bad at in order to make the case we're trying to make." "I understand." Claire, she took off her glasses. She was one of those people who take off their glasses when they want the unmediated version of a conversation. "I need you to understand not just intellectually. I need you to understand emotionally, because what I'm going to tell you is true, and it's going to be hard to hold at the same time. The law is not always a tool for justice. Sometimes it is a container that gives exactly as much shape to injustice as it gives to the right outcome. What Diane did was wrong. What Derek Holloway facilitated was wrong, and I cannot prove it to the standard required." I looked at her office wall. She had a print of the North Carolina state seal and a framed photo of the Asheville skyline and a law school diploma from UNC, and none of these things were relevant, but I looked at them. Keep going, I said. She kept going. The second meeting was 18 months later, after the first appeal. The appeal had argued procedural irregularity in the notarization, specifically that R. Simmons, the notary public, had failed to properly confirm Raymond's capacity at the time of execution. The court found that the notarization was performed in accordance with North Carolina General Statutes, Chapter Murray B. R. Simmons' log showed the date, the time, and a capacity notation that she had presumably filled in at 11:17 p.m., without apparent concern about what an attending physician might have noted about the patient's sedation schedule. Jonna presented this outcome with the specific neutrality of a professional who has been doing this work for many years and has learned that the emotion is real but cannot live in the room with the facts. She kept her voice even. She went through the court's reasoning point by point. She told me what our options were. What are our options? I said. She listed them. There were three. They involved significant additional expense, substantially reduced probability of different outcomes, and timelines measured in years. I took 3 days to decide. I called Aunt Marjorie, who listened without offering an opinion, because she understood that the opinion wasn't what I needed. I walked around the city for an afternoon. I sat in the apartment and looked at the photograph of the house, and thought about what my father would say. What my father would say, I thought, was, know when to stop. There's a kind of persistence that isn't courage. He said this to me once about a bridge project that was underfunded and overpromised, a project I had stayed on too long because leaving felt like failure. He said, sometimes the courageous thing is recognizing that further effort won't change the outcome. I called Jana and told her I wanted to proceed. I could not take my father's advice here. I was not able to. We proceeded. We exhausted everything. Then it was done. I thanked her. I sat on my kitchen floor for an hour. Then I got up, because there was no alternative to getting up. That is how the first life begins to end. Not with the death, with the arithmetic of what comes after. Jonna called me on a Friday afternoon in November, 3 years after my father's death. She said, Claire, I want to be honest with you about where we are. I was in my car in the parking lot of the grocery store. I had a bag of groceries in the passenger seat. I remember this very clearly, the specific ordinariness of it, the way the important moments always arrive while you're doing something small. Tell me, I said. The appeal was denied, she said. I've reviewed every possible remaining avenue, and I cannot in good conscience recommend pursuing them. The costs would be significant, and the probability of a different outcome is very low. I'm sorry, Claire. I've been doing this work for 20 years, and I believe what was done here was wrong, and I could not prove it to the required standard. I said, thank you for being honest. I sat in the parking lot for a while. The groceries sat in the passenger seat. A woman pushed a cart past my window and it squeaked, the left wheel, which made me think of the rolling suitcase at the Edinburgh airport, and the left wheel that squeaked, and all of it came back around the way it always did. I drove home. I put the groceries away. I sat on the kitchen floor of the apartment I could not afford to leave, and I stayed there for approximately 1 hour, and then I got up because there was nothing else to do. That is how the first life continues. Not with a dramatic moment, with a floor and a choice to get up from it and the going on after. I do not want to spend too long in the 18 years. They are not nothing. They are my life, and a life, even a diminished one, contains genuine things, genuine moments, people who mattered and work that meant something, and mornings that were simply good, but they are not what I am telling you. I'm telling you what happened before and what happened after, and the 18 years are the space between. So let me give you the shape of them, quickly, and then we will move on. I stayed in Asheville. I stayed in the firm, not the same firm. It was acquired in Heimer Bay, and the culture shifted, and I moved once laterally to another engineering consultancy that was steadier if less interesting. I stayed in the apartment. I had relationships, a man named David for 2 years, a woman named Sarah for 8 months at the end, the Sarah I thought about on the kitchen floor that Thursday morning in March. I had friends. I had Aunt Marjorie, who called every Tuesday until she moved into assisted living in Haikonghami 2, and the calls became shorter and less frequent, and then stopped, which is the way these things go. I had the photograph on the bookshelf. Christmas morning, my mother in the doorway, the overexposed light. And I had the specific low-grade quality of a life that is not what it was meant to be, which I am not sure how to explain to someone who hasn't lived it. It is not despair. It is something more like a frequency that is slightly off. Everything is almost right and never quite right, and you can feel the gap between what is and what should have been in the particular texture of your Mondays and your Thursdays and your February evenings. That is the 18 years. Now, let me tell you what they cost. Let me tell you what three things cost. Not in the abstract. Not the grief, which is private and doesn't translate to numbers anyway. The specific, innumerable costs of what Diane Fowler did on the 3rd of October at 11:17 in the evening when she stood beside a hospital bed where my father lay under the influence of fentanyl and Ambien and held a pen in front of him and said, "Sign here, Raymond." I don't know exactly what she said. I have imagined it many times. I think she kept it simple. I think she said something like, "This is for the house, sweetheart." Or, "The lawyer needs your signature. It won't take a minute." My father, at that hour, on those medications, in that state, would have reached for the pen without asking. He trusted people. He trusted her. He had stood in a blue suit at the Methodist church and placed his hand in hers, and he trusted her completely. This is the cost. The house in Asheville had been in our family for 31 years. My parents bought it when I was 3, a 4-bedroom craftsman on a half-acre lot on the east side of the city, with a front porch that wrapped around the left side and a backyard that was half vegetable garden, half nothing in particular, and a kitchen with yellow countertops that my mother always meant to replace and never did. I grew up in that house. I learned to ride a bicycle in that driveway. I broke my left wrist falling out of the oak tree in the backyard when I was 8, and my father sat with me in the emergency room for 4 hours, reading me terrible jokes from a paperback book he found in the waiting room. I left for college from that house. I came back every Christmas. After my mother died, I came back every chance I got because my father was alone in that house, and the house was the shape of our family, and I needed to be inside it periodically to believe that things still held. Diane sold it 14 months after my father died. She sold it to a developer for $890,000. The developer knocked down the backyard oak tree and subdivided the lot. There are 2 townhomes there now. I drove past once about 5 years after, and I did not stop. I drove past at 30 miles an hour and kept going and did not look in the rearview mirror. The price she got for the Raleigh property was $1.6 million. It had appreciated. The brokerage account had grown to just over $380,000 by the time probate closed. She was by any measure a wealthy woman. She did not remain in Asheville. She moved to a condo in Sarasota, Florida, which I know because Aunt Marjorie tracked it for a while before she got too old to care about tracking things. I had my own money. I want to be accurate about this. I was a structural engineer with 15 years of experience, and I earned a reasonable salary. I had savings. I was not destitute. What I did not have was the down payment for a house in the Asheville market, as it existed in the years after my father's death, when property values accelerated in ways that feel almost cruel in retrospect. What I did not have was the buffer that would have allowed me to change firms when the one I worked for was acquired, and the culture shifted in ways that wore me down slowly over several years. What I did not have was the foundation that would have let me take the 2-year contract in Denver that a colleague offered me, working on a project I actually cared about, a project on water infrastructure in underserved communities that would have been, I think, the most meaningful work of my professional life. I stayed. I stayed in the same apartment I'd rented at 34 because moving required a deposit I didn't have. I stayed in the same firm because the risk of leaving felt too large. I stayed in the same city because at some point the staying had become the shape of my life, and changing shapes required energy I was always running slightly short of. This is not a story about poverty. It is a story about a particular kind of diminishment, the kind that comes not from catastrophe, but from the slow, compounding absence of what should have been there. The Denver contract came up in Haikomichin. A colleague named Priyanka, who had moved to a consultancy that was doing infrastructure work in rural Colorado, water systems primarily, in communities that had inadequate access, the kind of work that my father would have valued enormously. She sent me the job description on a Tuesday. I read it 3 times. The contract was 2 years. It paid well, not extravagantly, but well. The problem was the move. Moving required a deposit on an apartment in Denver, and deposits required savings, and savings required the kind of financial cushion that the apartment I was in, whose rent had increased twice in 3 years, had never quite allowed me to build. The timing was also difficult because I was in the middle of a project at the consultancy, and leaving mid-project felt professionally complicated. Priyanka called me a week after she sent the description. "Did you look at it?" she asked. "I looked at it," I said. "And?" "I'm not sure the timing is right," I said. The silence on her end lasted 2 seconds longer than it should have. Claire, she said in the tone of a friend who is choosing her words carefully, the timing is always going to be not quite right. That's not a timing problem. She wasn't wrong. But she also couldn't see the specific arithmetic of my situation, the rent, the savings, the project timeline, the way all the small constraints added up to a wall that looked passable from the outside and was considerably less passable from where I was standing. Tell me they found someone good, I said. They found someone fine, she said. I said nothing. Okay, she said. I'm going to stop pushing. But I want you to know I think you would have been excellent at it. I went to the kitchen after we hung up and I made tea that I didn't drink. The foundation, the missing thing, not the house itself, not the money as a number, but what the money represented, the ability to absorb risk, to move, to say yes to things that required a margin I had never managed to accumulate. My father built 40 years of that margin, and Diane took it in 11 days, and what I spent for 3 years trying to get it back was what would have been the margin itself. You cannot explain this cleanly to people who haven't lived it. The costs that matter most are not the dramatic ones. They are the ones that never become visible. The projects you didn't take, the apartments you didn't rent, the risks you didn't absorb because the floor that should have been there wasn't. My father built that estate over 40 years. He was not a flashy man, and he was not a lucky man in the way some people are lucky. He was careful. He bought the Raleigh property in Highcombe High for $400,000, and he managed it himself for 20 years, fixing what needed fixing, finding tenants through word of mouth, treating it as a thing to be tended rather than a speculation. The watercolor paintings he sold occasionally through a gallery on Lexington Avenue, modestly, a few $1,000s here and there. The money he saved from a career in civil engineering. He built something solid and real, and he wanted it to go to his daughter and his sister and a cause he believed in. What it went to instead was a condo in Sarasota. I do not want to reduce Diane Fowler to a villain in the simple sense. I have thought about her too long and too carefully for that. She was a woman in her mid-50s who had lost her husband and her financial stability in the same blow, who had then met a man she may even have genuinely loved, and who had looked at what he had and decided that the love was not enough to secure her future. She was afraid. I understand fear. She was calculating. I understand calculation. What I cannot rationalize away, what I have tried for 18 years to view with some kind of detachment and never quite managed, is the specificity of the act. She did not simply influence my father while his cognition was declining. She waited. She chose the moment. She chose 11:17 in the evening, when the day nurses had gone, and the night nurses were busy, and my father was on his second round of fentanyl, and the Ambien had been administered at 10. She brought Derek Holloway, her personal attorney, a man she had retained months before my father's hospitalization, which came out in the deposition, and which the court somehow found insufficient to establish premeditation. She brought a notary. She planned it. This is what I know now and knew then, and what the court decided was not enough. The law has a high tolerance for the plans of the living when the dead can no longer contradict them. Philip Garrett called me in the third year, after the appeals were exhausted. He was in his 80s by then, and he called on a Tuesday afternoon in February, and we talked for 20 minutes about nothing in particular before he said, Claire, I want you to know that I've been in this work for 45 years, and what happened to your father's estate, what was done, is among the more deliberate acts of manipulation I've seen in a probate context. I want you to know that I know it, even if the court didn't say so. I thanked him. I meant it more than almost anything I've said. He died that spring. Another thing that was gone. The years develop their own momentum. You wake up at 38 and you are surprised to be there. You wake up at 43 and you are less surprised and more tired. You wake up at 49 and you have a colleague who calls you a seasoned professional and means it as a compliment, and you understand that you are in the chapter of your life where the compliments have changed shape. Something specific about the years from 35 to 40. The litigation is active and the hope is still alive, and hope in this specific form. The hope of a legal proceeding, which is a hope with defined boundaries, with dates and filings and an opponent you can name, is a particular kind of sustaining thing. It gives the days a structure that absence of hope would not. I go to Jana's office and I sit across from her, and we work through the next argument and the next motion and the next deposition, and the working through is a form of agency, which is a form of meaning, and I hold on to that. From 40 to 45, the litigation is over and the hope is gone, and I am in what I later understood was the most difficult period, because the difficult thing about the absence of hope is not the grief. The grief was real but finite. The grief was a thing I could name and sit with, but the specific flatness that follows. The motivation that had organized my interior life for 3 years is gone, and what is left is the undifferentiated quality of ordinary days. I go to work. I come home. I make dinner. The apartment has the yellow light of its south-facing kitchen window, and the knocking pipe in the wall behind the bathroom, and the particular squeaking of the hardwood outside my bedroom door that I have lived with for so long it has become a kind of landmark. I am 42 when I understand that I am not going to get what I lost back. This is not a dramatic understanding. It arrives one Tuesday afternoon in February while I am making tea in the apartment kitchen, and it is simply quietly true. The estate is gone. The house is gone. Philip Garrett is old, and the case is closed, and Diane Fowler is in Sarasota. These are the facts, and I live inside them. From 45 to 52, the living inside the facts. Not dramatically. Not even sadly, most of the time. Sadness requires energy, and by 45 I have found a more sustainable mode, which is a kind of deliberate attentiveness to what is in front of me. The work which is real and sometimes interesting. Aunt Marjorie on Tuesdays. The colleague who brings coffee without being asked. The south-facing window in the kitchen and the light. Small things that are genuinely present, that do not require the estate to be present in order to be valued. I was not miserable. I want to be clear about this, not to soften the story, but because it is true. A life of diminishment is not a life of misery. It is a life of less than, of slightly off, of the persistent awareness of what was taken. These are different experiences, and it is important that I name the one I actually lived. What I never did in those 7 years from 45 to 52 was believe that what I had was enough. I lived in it. I managed it. I found genuine things in it. But I always knew it was less than what should have been there, and the knowing was a companion I brought everywhere, unasked for, unavoidable, as present as the squeaking floorboard outside the bedroom door. I kept a photograph of the Asheville house on my bookshelf. It was taken when I was 6. Christmas morning, snow on the front porch, my mother in the doorway in her red bathrobe, laughing at something off camera. The photograph is slightly overexposed. It's not a great photograph technically. I kept it because it is proof of the thing that existed before anyone took anything. I kept the photograph on my bookshelf until the morning I died. I want to tell you about that morning because it is important, because it is where the second life begins. I am 52 years old, or rather, I was 52 years old for approximately 47 minutes on a Thursday morning in March. I want to tell you about the apartment, not because it was a bad place. It wasn't. The landlord was a fair man who fixed things when they broke and did not raise the rent by more than 3% in any given year, which, in the West Asheville rental market of the Highcombe High Moors, was bordering on saintly. The apartment had good light. The south-facing kitchen window was particularly good, a wide window that got the full afternoon sun, so that the kitchen was the warmest room in the apartment from noon until dusk. I lived there for 18 years. I know every corner of it with the specific intimacy of long occupation. The spot on the hallway floor that creaks, the bathroom faucet that drips if you don't turn it all the way to the off position, the kitchen cabinet above the stove that has to be held closed for 3 seconds, or it swings back open. I know where the autumn light lands at 4 p.m. and where the winter light doesn't reach at all. I know the sound of my upstairs neighbor's shoes, a heavy man who walked emphatically, heel first, every morning. The apartment was the shape that my life had taken, not the shape I chose. The shape that the loss produced, and that I stayed inside because leaving required more than I had. Aunt Marjorie used to come for Thanksgiving. She would take the bus from her house on the other side of Asheville, which was a 20-minute bus ride, which tells you something about the particular kind of apartment I lived in relative to the aunt I had. She would bring the cranberry sauce, the recipe my father made, which she had asked him for and written down in her neat handwriting on an index card. We would eat at the small table by the south window, and the afternoon light would come in, and it genuinely would be, a good Thanksgiving. She stopped coming after Highcombsheim alum, when the memory issues that had been coming for a long time settled into something more definitively present, and the assisted living facility on Elk Mountain Scenic Highway became her home. I visited her there. I visited her there every 2 weeks until she stopped recognizing me, and then once a month until she passed, in the spring of Highcombe at 89, without pain. Another thing that was gone. And Sarah, the woman named Sarah, whom I was planning to have to dinner on the Friday that did not happen. We had been dating for 8 months carefully, the way I approached most things. The measured pace of someone who has had enough things taken to be cautious about what she reaches for. She was a landscape architect. She had a laugh that was genuinely startling, too big for the room, the kind that makes everyone around you turn and smile without knowing why. We were, I think, heading somewhere real. I never found out where. On the kitchen floor at 52, in the 47 minutes I had left, I thought about her. I thought I should have asked sooner. I thought, the things you are being careful about are not what you think they are, and caution looks like protection and functions like distance. And I have spent 18 years being careful about the wrong things. That is the thought I died with. That one in my father's hands. The apartment is the same one I've lived in for 18 years. The one I moved into at 34 when I first came back from Edinburgh. The one I always planned to leave and never quite did. It is on the fourth floor of a building in West Asheville that was built in Mochintami Bay and has good bones but bad windows. And in March, the light comes in at a low angle through the east-facing bedroom window and lands on the floor in a long rectangle that moves across the hardwood over the course of an hour. I am watching the light move when it happens. I am standing at my kitchen counter with a cup of coffee, the second cup, not the first, and I am looking at my calendar, which is on my phone, which is propped against the coffee maker. I have a site visit at 10. I have a call with a structural assessment client at 2. There is a dinner Friday with a woman named Sarah, who I have been dating for 8 months carefully, in the way I have approached most things in my life, with the steady, controlled effort of someone who has learned not to assume that things will hold. I put the phone down. I reach for the coffee cup. There is a pressure behind my right eye that I have noticed, on and off, for 3 days. I have been meaning to call my doctor about it. I have been busy. The site visit at 10 is a bridge rehabilitation project, load distribution assessment, ironically enough. I have been good at this work. I have built a solid career out of it, careful and thorough, and if it is not the work I would have chosen in a world without constraints, it is good work and I have done it well. The pressure moves. It moves from behind my right eye to the right side of my head in a motion that is less pain and more displacement, as though something is shifting from one place to another, and then my right hand releases the coffee cup, and the coffee cup falls, and I hear it land, but I don't see it because my vision has gone soft on the right side. I sit down. Not by choice. My left knee folds, and I am on the kitchen floor, and the linoleum is cold through my jeans, and there is coffee spreading in a slow brown arc from the mug that has not broken. The mug says Asheville's across the front in large letters. It was a gift from a coworker years ago. It is large enough for 2 cups. I have used it every morning for 4 years. I should call Chin Mimot. I know I should call Chin Mimot. The phone is on the counter above me. I can reach it. I try to reach it. My right arm does not respond the way I ask it to. I stay on the floor. I am not afraid in the way I expected to be afraid. There is something that might be calm settling through me, or might just be the brain doing what brains do when a significant event is occurring, and the conscious mind has not yet processed the full scope of it. I look at the coffee spreading on the floor. I look at the light coming through the kitchen window, which faces south and is gentler than the east-facing bedroom light, a warmer angle. I think about my father. This is the specific thought. I think about the fact that he is gone, and that the house is gone, and that I never found a way to make the loss settle into something that felt finished. That the photograph on the bookshelf is still there, still Christmas morning, still my mother in the red bathrobe. That Sarah is coming to dinner on Friday, and I was going to cook the braised short ribs that she likes, and I was planning to ask her, finally, whether she thought we might be heading somewhere real. That I have a plant by the window, a pothos, nearly unkillable, that I have kept alive for 6 years and that will not be watered after today. I think. I was not done. And then the light on the kitchen floor is very bright, and then it is not anything at all. I wake up at 34. I need to say that again because the first time it happens, the sentence does not fit inside the world as I understand it. I wake up at 34. I am in a bed I recognize, the queen bed in the apartment I moved into in my first life at 34, which means I am at the beginning of something rather than the end. The duvet cover is a particular shade of deep teal that I chose from a catalog in Highcombe High, a catalog that no longer exists because the company went out of business in Highcombe Sao. And I know this because I was 38 when it happened, and I mourned the catalog mildly. The duvet cover is teal and slightly faded at the top left corner where the sun hits it through a gap in the curtains. I lie very still. The alarm on the phone on the nightstand reads Sabontam AM. The date reads Saturday, October Sao. Saturday, October Sao. My father's hip surgery is scheduled for Monday, October Tam. I have been here before. I have lived from this point forward. I know exactly what happens next. I go to work on Monday, because my father told me not to cut my trip short, and I listened. And on Tuesday morning, I land in Edinburgh, and my phone comes out of airplane mode, and there are 17 missed calls, and my father is already gone, and so is everything he built. I know this because I lived it. I sit up. My hands are my 34-year-old hands. This is the detail that lands first, the specific texture of the skin on the back of my hands, which is different at 34 than at 52. Softer, less marked by time. I flex both hands. Both of them respond. Both. I press my palms flat against the duvet and I breathe. The gap between the kitchen floor and this bed is not a gap I can describe accurately. I was on the linoleum. My right arm was not responding. The coffee was spreading in a slow brown arc, and the light was very bright, and then it was nothing. And then, duvet cover, teal, particular shade, early morning October light through curtain gap, alarm reading Sabantam AM, Saturday, October Sao. The body has no record of the 18 years. That is the strangest part. The body simply does not know. My back does not hurt. My vision in my right eye is correct. I am hungry in the way of someone who had dinner last night, not in the way of someone who has been living for 18 years in a body that has accumulated time. The 52 years I remember are in my mind, intact and precise and complete, and the body they happened in is absent. There is no scar tissue for the decades. There is only the 34-year-old body, standing on the linoleum of the apartment I first rented in October of this year, with everything the future held inside me like something swallowed whole. I stand at the kitchen counter. The same counter, slightly different knife block. The coffee maker not yet the one that will break twice before I replace it in my early 40s. And I grip the edge of the counter with both hands and I breathe. The thought that comes is not a plan. The thought that comes is he is alive. That is the whole thought. Before the list, before the appointments, before Margaret Osey and Philip Garrett and Dr. Huang and the recording app on my phone. Before all of it, there is just he is alive. He is on Ridgecrest Road right now, 7 miles from this kitchen, drinking his second cup of coffee, reading the actual newspaper. His hip is manageable enough to walk around the house. He has the Saturday watercolor class this morning, and Dorothy will be there with her nurse's precision, and Bill with his tremors, and the chess players in the cafe will be at their table before the class begins. He is alive, and I have 4 days, and I know everything that needs to happen. That is more than enough. 4 days. I have 4 days before my father goes under anesthesia. I have 11 days before Derek Holloway brings the notary to the hospital. I have, if I use the time precisely, everything I need to make sure none of it happens. The grief of 18 years is still in me, completely intact, as clear and specific as it was on the kitchen floor of the apartment I died in. Every detail, every piece of paper, every deposition transcript, every conversation I've turned over in the dark. All of it is knowledge now. I sit at the edge of the bed in the October morning light, and I make a list in my head, and the list is a plan, and the plan is a beginning. The first thing I do is cancel Edinburgh. Not reschedule. Cancel. I call the conference coordinator at Baimui Lam AM and explain that there is a family medical situation and I will not be able to attend. The coordinator is apologetic and helpful and asks if I would like to submit a written version of my presentation for the conference proceedings. I say yes, thank you, I'll send it by end of week. I hang up and put the phone face down on the counter. My father is alive. He is at the house on Ridgecrest Road, probably drinking his second cup of coffee, probably reading the newspaper, because he still got the physical newspaper at 71. He is alive, and the hip surgery is Monday, and I have 4 days. I do not call him yet. Calling him requires composure I don't currently have. Hearing his voice, the specific texture of it, the way he says Clary, I am not ready to do that without breaking in a way he would notice, in a way I would have to explain. I need to be strategic before I am emotional, and then I can be both. I should tell you what it is like to be 34 again. The first thing is physical, the specific quality of the body at 34, which I notice immediately and with a dissonance that would be difficult to describe to someone who has not experienced it. My back does not ache in the particular way my back had been aching for the last 7 years. My hands are smooth. I have said this, but I keep coming back to it, keep turning them over in the morning light as though verifying something. The vision in my right eye, which had been developing a slow drift that my optometrist called entirely manageable, and that I privately thought of as another thing slightly off from what it should be. It is fine. It is entirely fine. The body at 34 is a different instrument than the body at 52. It trusts itself more. It moves without the low-grade negotiation that comes with age. I sit at the edge of the bed, for I don't know exactly. 15 minutes, perhaps. Long enough for the light through the curtains to change direction slightly, which in October in Asheville means that the morning is properly underway, and the sun has cleared the roofline across the street. And the day is going to be the kind of day that doesn't announce itself dramatically, but is simply present and available. I have 4 days. My father's hip surgery is Monday, October tam. Derek Holloway arrives at the hospital on Tuesday, October cheen at 11 in the evening. The pulmonary embolism takes my father in the early hours of October Reborn, or it did, in the life that already happened, and that I do not intend to let happen again. 4 days. And the knowledge of 18 years, and the complete absence of the specific grief-worn patience I developed in those years. I am 34, and the loss is still theoretical to me in this body, still the future rather than the past, and the combination of that freshness and my older knowledge is something I have no precedent for. It is the sharpest clarity I have ever felt. I get dressed. I make coffee. I open my laptop. The list. Let me tell you the list. Item 1, an estate attorney who is not Philip Garrett. I love Philip Garrett. He is a good man and a thorough attorney, and he spent 3 years fighting the revised will with everything he had. He also spent 3 years in the position of being unable to prove what could not be proved after the fact. What I need is someone positioned ahead of the event, not behind it. I need someone who can establish in writing, with dated documentation, that my father's original estate wishes were known, clear, and expressed without influence before the will revision occurs. I need someone who can advise on what structures exist to protect an elderly patient's estate decisions during a period of medical vulnerability, conservatorship, medical powers of attorney, the specific legal instruments that exist precisely for situations like this one. I open my laptop and I search for elder law attorneys in Asheville. I note 3 names. I call the first at 8 a.m. when the office opens. Her name is Margaret Osey. She has been practicing elder law for 17 years. I get a consultation appointment for high PM on Saturday today. Item 2, a medical advocate. This is a thing I learned about 18 months after my father died, in the kind of desperate, recursive research that grief produces. A medical advocate can be formally designated in a patient's care plan, someone who is present during treatment discussions, who has access to the patient's records, who can flag concerns about a patient's capacity to make legal decisions while under medication. It is not the same as a power of attorney. It is a formal recognition of a designated person's role in the patient's medical context. I needed to know this 18 years ago. I know it now. I call Asheville Memorial Hospital and ask for the patient advocacy office. I explain that my father is scheduled for surgery on Monday and that I have concerns about his capacity to make legal and financial decisions during his hospitalization, particularly given his pain management protocol. The person I speak to is cautious but helpful. She explains the process. She notes that the attending physician would need to be involved. She gives me a name, Dr. Patricia Huang, who will be my father's attending physician through the admission. I write down Dr. Patricia Huang. Item 3. A conversation with my father that does not happen on October 3rd at 11:17 in the evening with Derek Holloway in the room. This is the most delicate item. I need to speak to my father about his estate wishes, about the original will, which leaves everything to me and Marjorie and the foundation, before the hospitalization changes the calculus of what he can say freely. I need this conversation documented. I need a witness. I need it to be the kind of record that a court would have found, if we'd had it in the first life, so obvious and clear that no midnight notarization could have counterweighted it. I write down, call Dad. Tomorrow. Sunday morning, before he goes in Monday. I also write down, bring Aunt Marjorie. Item 4, Diane. I sit with this one for a while. I do not want to be wrong about Diane. This is the part of the plan that requires the most careful thinking, because the alternative, the one in which Diane Fowler had some other explanation for what happened on October 3rd, in which the timing was coincidence and the will revision was my father's freely chosen decision, is a possibility I have to hold alongside the one I believe. But I have had 18 years to think about this. And what I think, what I have always thought, is that a woman who genuinely loved my father and had been named in a will revision that was legally obtained would not have been so very careful about the specific hour it was executed. She would not have needed Derek Holloway, an attorney she had been consulting with, for 8 months before my father was ever hospitalized. She would not have needed the night hours, the late administered Ambien, the particular moment when the ward was quiet and my father was agreeable. Innocent things don't require that kind of architecture. So, Diane. What I need from Diane is a recording. I need her to say, in her own words, enough of what she did that the words become evidence. She will not know she is being recorded. She will say things because she thinks the current circumstances are in her favor. My father is alive. The surgery is upcoming. She is his wife, and presumably the primary person in his life. She will say things that she will not realize I will keep. I know enough about what she did, and enough about how she thought to give her the right opening. The question is timing. The recording has to happen after Margaret Osi has documented my concerns formally after Dr. Huang has been alerted after Aunt Marjorie knows what I know. I need the record to exist before the recording, so that the recording is the culmination of a documented pattern, not an isolated piece of evidence. Thursday. I will call Diane on Thursday, the night before my father's surgery. I write, Thursday call, recording. I meet with Margaret Osi at 2 o'clock. Her office is on the third floor of a building on College Street. She is a compact woman in her late 40s with close-cropped hair and reading glasses that she takes off and puts on repeatedly during conversation, as though she thinks better with them off and sees better with them on. She listens to me for 20 minutes without interrupting. I tell her everything. Or rather, I tell her everything in the form of concern. I am concerned about my father's estate. I have concerns about a person in his life whose motives I cannot fully assess. I am concerned about his capacity during the hospitalization. I want to know what I can do to protect his clearly stated prior wishes. She does not look at me with the patience of someone waiting for the dramatic revelation. She looks at me with the precision of someone taking notes in her head. Has your father expressed his estate wishes to you directly? She asks. Yes, I say. He created a will 12 years ago. Philip Garrett is his estate attorney. The will leaves the estate to me, my aunt, and a charitable foundation. He has never indicated any intention to revise it. Has he given your stepmother any indication to your knowledge of a different intention? Not to my knowledge, I say. And my father is the kind of person who would have mentioned it to me. She nods. What I'd recommend, she says, is a witness documented conversation with your father before the surgery, ideally with his existing estate attorney present, or with a witness who can attest to his stated wishes. This creates a contemporaneous record. If anyone were to attempt a revision during his hospitalization, this record would be significant counter-evidence. Can we do that Monday? I ask. I can make myself available Monday morning, she says. We'd need to arrange for a witness. Your Aunt Marjorie, did you say? And I'd want to have a brief conversation with Philip Garrett to coordinate. I leave her office at Babylon p.m. The October light is low and bronze on College Street, and the mountains in the distance are beginning their turn toward fall. I stand on the sidewalk for a moment, and I do something I have not done since the kitchen floor on that Thursday morning in March at 52. I breathe out. The plan is real now. It is no longer the elaborate interior calculation of a woman who woke up at 34 with 18 years of knowledge and no infrastructure for using it. It has a date. It has a name attached to it, Margaret Osi, and a professional structure and a room in which it was discussed. And the discussion made it concrete in a way that sitting in my apartment making lists could not. I go to the grocery store. This is not a significant action. I go to the grocery store because I have 4 days of careful work ahead of me and I need to eat, and the specificity of that requirement, the fact that this body at 34 needs dinner, is something I find grounding in a way I would not have predicted. I buy vegetables. I buy bread. I buy the kind of coffee my father likes, the medium roast from the local roaster on Lexington Avenue, because I am going to see him tomorrow and I will bring it, because that is what you do. In the grocery store, I pass the bulletin board near the exit, the kind of board with flyers for local events and lost cats and handymen. There is a flyer for a watercolor class at the Community Arts Center on Saturday mornings. My father teaches that class, has taught it for 3 years. I know this because I remember his mentioning it. The first year after the surgery, I've started teaching, Clary. It keeps the hands moving. But in my first life, I never went to watch him teach. In this life, I am going to go. Not this Saturday. I have too much to arrange. But the thought of it is in me now, lodged. I am going to go to that class and watch my father teach, and I am going to not take it for granted. That is the particular gift of having had something taken. You know with a specificity that is almost physical what you were taking for granted before. I drive home with the groceries. I put them away. I call Aunt Marjorie. I'm home, I say, when she picks up. I didn't go to Edinburgh. A pause. Is everything all right? Everything is fine, I say. I'm fine. I wanted to be home. There's something I need to talk to you about. Can I come over tomorrow? Of course, she says without hesitation. This is Aunt Marjorie. She does not ask why. She opens the door. She has always been this way. Thank you, I say. I am grateful for her. The way I was not quite grateful enough in the first life, because she was always there. because always there things tend to receive the particular underappreciation reserved for things you expect to continue. She will not continue forever. She is in her early 70s now, and she is well and sharp and knitting blue somethings, but she will not continue forever. I know this. I know exactly how she will go and when, and I am not going to tell her that. What I am going to do is see her more, call more, not assume that Tuesday is guaranteed. That is also part of the plan. Perhaps the most important part. Sunday I go to the house on Ridgecrest Road. My father answers the door in his reading glasses and the gray sweater he has worn every autumn for as long as I can remember. He says, "Clary, I thought you were in Edinburgh," and I say, "I couldn't go. I wanted to be home." He looks at me with the particular alertness that he reserves for moments when he thinks something is being withheld. He was always able to tell when I was keeping something from him, not in the accusatory way, just in the way of a man who had known me since I was born and could read the specific quality of my silences. "Is everything all right?" he says. "Everything is fine," I say. "Can I come in? I want to talk to you before the surgery." We sit in the kitchen with the yellow countertops that my mother always meant to replace, and I drink the coffee he makes, and I tell him carefully that I've been thinking about his estate, that I want to make sure everything is in order, that I've been talking to an attorney about what happens to elderly patients' legal decision-making capacity during hospitalization, and that I want us to have a formal conversation with Philip Garrett before he goes in Monday. My father watches me the whole time I speak. When I finish, he is quiet for a moment. "Diane's been mentioning the estate," he says. My heart does a specific thing at this. Not a surge, more like a lock clicking shut. "Mentioning it how?" I ask. He picks up his coffee mug. He looks at it. He says, "She feels that the current arrangement doesn't account for her sufficiently. In case something were to happen to me." He pauses. "I told her I'd think about it. I keep my voice even. And have you thought about it?" "I've thought about it," he says. "I don't want to change the will, Clary. Your mother and I built what we built for you and Marjorie and those communities up in the mountains. That's where it belongs." I look at my father's hands around his coffee mug. The hands I know. The hands that taught me to hold a hammer and a fishing rod and a watercolor brush, in that order, across the years. "Then let's make sure that's what happens," I say. "Will you come with me Monday morning to meet with Philip before you go in for the surgery?" He says, "Yes." That is the word. Simple. Clear. Yes. We sit for a while after that, in the kitchen, with the coffee cooling, the October Sunday light doing its thing through the window. My father tells me about the hip, the way it's been limiting him more than he lets on, the specific geography of pain that he has been managing quietly, not wanting to worry anyone. He tells me about the surgeon, Dr. Park, who he met for the first time last month, and who he likes because the man explains things without condescension. He tells me about the watercolor class on Saturday mornings, and that he had a student last week who had never held a brush before, and by the end of the session had made something that made them both laugh. He tells me about the group that comes on Saturday mornings, a woman named Dorothy who is in her late 60s and was a nurse for 40 years and paints with the focused methodology of someone accustomed to precise work, and a retired schoolteacher named Bill whose wrist tremors make his watercolors look impressionistic even when he's trying to be literal, and who has become my father's favorite student because the tremors are making him a better painter than his own intention would have. He tells me about the cafe where he has breakfast before the Saturday classes, the one on Lexington Avenue that has the good coffee and the chess table by the window where the same two men play every morning, and my father has never spoken to them, but has watched them for 2 years and has theories about the quality of their rivalry. He tells me these things, and I listen to every word. This is the detail of a life, not the will, not the estate, not the mortgage on the Raleigh property. The Dorothy who was a nurse, the trembling Bill, the chess players he has watched for 2 years through a cafe window. This is the detail I never knew, or knew but let pass through without keeping it. This is the detail you lose when you lose a person, and that grief reconstructs badly. You remember the shape of the person, the sound of their voice, the general quality of their goodness, but you lose these specific, daily renewed details, the names they knew, the observations they carried, the particular texture of how they spent a Tuesday. I listen. I listen with everything I have, which is a specific quality of attention that I am aware of differently than I was in the first version of this life. In the first version, I listened, but I also half planned things, half worried about Edinburgh, half thought about the project waiting on my desk. In this version, I am not half anything. I am entirely in this kitchen with this man at this table. He notices. He tilts his head in the way he does when he's observing something. What is it? He says. You keep looking at me like I'm going somewhere. You're going somewhere on Monday, I say. The hospital. That's not what you mean, he says. I look at my coffee mug. I know, I say. I want to be here, Dad, while you're here. He is quiet for a moment. Then, you are here. I know, I say. I know I am. I call Aunt Marjorie that afternoon. I tell her everything. Monday morning, Philip Garrett's office. It is 7:45 a.m., which is earlier than Philip normally works, and I can tell from the way he greets us that he is bemused by the gathering. My father is in his blue suit, not the funeral suit, a different blue, a lighter shade, the one he wears when he wants to feel professional. Aunt Marjorie is beside him in a green wool coat, her hair neat, her posture the specific upright architecture of a woman who intends to be witnessed. I am in the suit I wore to a client presentation 3 weeks ago, which still has a dry cleaning tag on the lapel that I forgot to remove. Philip listens to what I have brought him. I lay it out. My concerns about the hospitalization, Margaret Osie's recommendations, the conversation with my father Sunday afternoon. Raymond, Philip says, when I'm done. What would you like the record to reflect? My father looks at me, then at Philip, then at Marjorie, who nods once, small and precise. I want the record to reflect that the will I signed in High Comlea High represents my wishes, my father says, fully and without reservation. The estate is to go to Claire, to Marjorie, and to the Appalachian Water Foundation. That is what I want, and that is what I have always wanted. Philip writes this down. He writes it in longhand on the legal pad he uses for everything, and then he reads it back to my father, and my father says, yes, that is correct. Margaret Osie, who I have arranged to attend by phone, notes for the record that she is a witness to the statement. Philip's paralegal, Sandra, who has worked for him for 22 years, is also in the room. The document is dated, timed, signed, witnessed. It exists. Whatever happens next, whatever arrives at 11:17 in the evening on October 3rd, cannot erase this morning. My father goes into surgery at 1 p.m. The procedure is a total hip replacement. The surgeon is Dr. William Park, who has done 4,000 of these, and who explains the procedure to us with the economy of motion of someone who has explained it 4,000 times before. My father will be under general anesthesia for approximately 2 hours. Recovery room, then transfer to a private room on the fourth floor. Expected hospital stay 3 to 4 days. We are in the waiting room, Aunt Marjorie and I, for 2 hours and 17 minutes. Diane is also there. She arrives at the waiting room approximately 20 minutes after surgery begins. She brings coffee, 3 cups from the hospital cafeteria, in cardboard cups with plastic lids. She hands one to Marjorie, one to me. She sits across from us with the third. I watch her hands around the cup. Steady. Controlled. The hands of a woman who is holding herself to a shape she has decided on and is not going to deviate from. She says, thank you for being here. She means it for me, I think. As a statement. An acknowledgement of the fact that I canceled Edinburgh, that I reorganized my week, that I am here in the waiting room of Asheville Memorial Hospital on a Monday afternoon instead of at a conference. She says it the way you say it when the presence of a person has slightly complicated the arrangement you were working with. Of course, I say. Marjorie looks between us with the specific serenity of a woman who has lived long enough to recognize the temperature of a room. He's going to do beautifully, Marjorie says about my father. It is slightly louder than necessary, the sentence calibrated to fill the space. William Park is an excellent surgeon. Patricia Cho at my church had both hips done by him. She's gardening again. Diane says, that's reassuring. And we drink the cafeteria coffee in the specific quiet of 3 women who are each thinking about different versions of the afternoon ahead. And the television in the corner plays the news channel with the sound off. And somewhere in the hospital, my father's hip is being addressed by 4,000 repetitions of practice. And I sit with my hands wrapped around the warm cup and I breathe. I was afraid in the first life during this wait. Afraid in the ordinary way of a daughter whose father is in surgery, the specific low-frequency dread of the waiting room. In this life I am also afraid, but the fear is differently shaped. It is not about the surgery. Doctor, Park does not make mistakes in hip replacements. My father's hip is going to be fine. What I am afraid of is the 11 p.m. on Tuesday, which I have set in motion measures to address, and which I cannot fully predict. I have the chart note. I have Doctor Huang's contact. I have Margaret Osie on speed dial. I have done everything I can think to do. The fear of incompletion, the fear that I have not thought of something, is the particular fear of someone who has had 18 years to identify exactly what was insufficient the first time, and who knows that knowing is not the same as being certain. There is a specific gap in my knowledge that I have been sitting with since Saturday. I know what Diane did, but I do not know how she will react when it is blocked. In my first life, she didn't need to react. There was no block. The revision went through. The estate was hers before I landed in Edinburgh. I have never had to anticipate the next move in a confrontation with Diane Fowler, because there never was a confrontation. There was only an outcome that had already happened. The recording is a contingency. The bar complaint is a contingency. The forensic accountant is a contingency. I have built this network of contingencies against an adversary I know thoroughly in retrospect and not at all in real time, and there is a particular quality of vertigo in that, like having the map of a city you've only ever visited in photographs. She is not stupid. She is careful, and she plans. The attorney she retained 8 months before the hospitalization is evidence of that. The choice of 11 p.m., the choice of the night the ward was quieter, the particular medications and their timing. These are not the choices of someone who is afraid and acting impulsively. They are the choices of someone who had thought through the obstacles and arranged to eliminate them. She will think through my obstacles too. I drink the coffee. I sit with the fear. I let the waiting room be what it is. 2 hours and 17 minutes. Marjorie knits. She has been a knitter for 50 years, and she knits the way other people breathe. Automatically, without apparent thought, the needles moving in a rhythm that I find, despite everything, calming. She is knitting something blue, and I don't ask what it is. Tell me about Diane, she says, not looking up from the knitting. What do you want to know? What you know that you haven't said yet. I look at the waiting room ceiling, which is the same institutional white as every hospital ceiling. There is a television mounted in the corner playing a news channel with the sound off. A woman across the room is on her phone. A child is asleep in the chair beside her. I think she's been planning this for a while, I say. I think the attorney she hired 8 months ago wasn't for unrelated matters. I think she's been waiting for a moment of opportunity, and the surgery gave her one. Marjorie's needles don't pause. Do you think she loves your father? I think she might, I say. I think love and calculation can exist in the same person. Yes, Marjorie says. They can. The pain management conversation happens on the second day. I have already spoken to Dr. Huang, a brisk, precise woman who clearly values efficiency, and who listened to my concerns about my father's cognition and legal decision-making capacity with a focus that told me she was used to these conversations. I had the medical advocate form filed Monday afternoon. My name is on my father's patient record as a designated advocate with access to his treatment plan. On Tuesday morning, I asked to speak with Dr. Huang about the pain management protocol. Your father is on a standard post-operative protocol, she tells me. Opioid analgesia, muscle relaxant, sedative for sleep. His pain levels have been well managed. I'm concerned about his decision-making capacity during this period, I say. His estate attorney has documented his estate wishes in detail this morning. I want to make sure that his capacity is formally evaluated before he signs any legal documents during his stay. Doctor. Huang looks at me. Is there a specific concern you're aware of? There is, I say. I want to be careful about how I characterize it. I believe someone may attempt to have my father sign legal documents during this hospitalization. I believe this may happen in the evening when staffing is reduced and when his medications are at a higher level. She is quiet for a moment. That is a significant concern, she says. I know, I say. I wouldn't raise it if I weren't certain. She puts a note in my father's chart. Patient's designated medical advocate has flagged concerns regarding capacity for legal decisions during current admission. Attending to be notified before any non-medical documents are presented for signature. It is a note in a chart. It is not a wall, but it is a flag on the record, and a flag on the record means that when Derek Holloway arrives at 11:17 on Tuesday evening with a notary, the night nurse who checks in on my father will have been briefed and will call Dr. Huang and Dr. Huang will call me. She calls me at Mimo Kombon p.m. I am in my car in the hospital parking structure where I have been since Chin p.m. I was not going to be far. I pick up immediately. Miss Ashworth, there is an attorney in your father's room. Your father's wife brought him. They are presenting documents. I'll be there in 3 minutes, I say. Derek Holloway is a man of approximately 60 with a gray blazer and the specific containment of someone who has been in rooms like this many times before. He is standing beside my father's bed with a document folder when I walk in. The notary, a woman named R. Simmons, who I now know from deposition transcripts that don't exist in this life, but that I remember from the other one, is standing near the window with a stamp and a logbook. Diane is in the chair beside the bed. She stands when I walk in. My father is awake but soft around the edges. The Ambien was an hour ago, the fentanyl earlier in the evening. He looks at me with the recognition that takes a half-second longer than it should. Clary, he says. Hi, Dad, I say. I look at Derek Holloway. May I ask what documents are being presented? Derek Holloway is the kind of man who answers questions precisely and minimally. A revision to Mr. Ashworth's estate documents, he says, at the instruction of his wife. At the instruction of his wife, I repeat. I keep my voice even. Has my father reviewed the documents with his own attorney? These documents reflect Mr. Ashworth's current wishes, Derek says. His current wishes, I say, were documented this morning with Philip Garrett and a second attorney. They are on record. They are dated today and witnessed by multiple parties. I reach into my bag and put a copy of this morning's statement on the surface of the bedside tray. I do not hand it to Derek. I put it where my father can see it if he looks. I am my father's designated medical advocate. I'm asking that no legal documents be signed tonight without Dr. Huang present per the note on his chart. Diane says, Claire, this is between your father and me. My father's estate is not between you and me, I say, or between him and his medications at 11 p.m. His attorney has documented that his wishes, clearly stated this morning, do not include revisions to the existing will. Derek Holloway looks at the document on the tray. He looks at Diane. Something passes between them. Not words, just the specific quality of a look between two people who have discussed a contingency and are now in it. We'll reschedule, Derek says. He closes the document folder. He picks up his briefcase. The notary puts away her stamp and her logbook without making eye contact. They leave. I walk them out. This is not something I planned. It happens because I follow them to the door of the room without quite deciding to. And then I am in the hallway, and Derek Holloway is moving toward the elevator, and Diane is 2 steps behind him, and I am at the threshold of the room with my hand on the doorframe. Mr. Holloway, I say. He turns. I want you to know that I have a copy of my father's estate statement from this morning, witnessed by his attorney and a second elder law attorney. I have a copy of the note in my father's medical chart. I have documentation of your client's relationship with my father's wife, including the date your retainer began. I pause. If you bring documents to this hospital room again under these conditions, all of that documentation goes to the North Carolina State Bar with a formal complaint. Tonight, he looks at me. His expression is the professional stillness of a man who has been doing something he would prefer not to have in writing, who is calculating whether I am serious or whether I am bluffing. I am not bluffing. He cannot know this, but I am not. He says nothing. He turns and walks to the elevator. Diane looks at me from 6 feet away in the hospital corridor. She is composed in a way I recognize, the composure that is not calm but is a performance of calm, a management of expression under pressure. It is the composure of someone recalibrating. You've been planning this, she says. I've been making sure my father's wishes are protected, I say. The same as any daughter would do. My father looks between us. Even through the medication, through the soft edges of the evening's chemistry, he is tracking the room. He reaches out his hand, and I take it. Clary, he says. What is happening? Everything is fine, Dad, I say. Go to sleep. I'll be here. He does not go to sleep immediately. He holds my hand for a long time in the quiet of the hospital room, and the monitor beside his bed makes its steady, low rhythm, and the light from the hallway falls in a slant through the door that I have left open. After a while, he says, the man with the folder. He's gone, I say. Who was he? I consider this. Diane's attorney, I say. He brought some documents. We've asked him not to come back. Raymond is quiet for a moment. His grip on my hand is lighter than it was before, the medication doing its work, the edges of the evening softening. But his eyes are on the ceiling, and they are clear. She mentioned the estate, he says. A few times. I told her I wasn't sure. I know, I say. I know you told her. Apparently, he says, with a dryness that is entirely his, the specific dry note he uses when something has been confirmed to be what he suspected, not sure was being translated differently than I intended. I almost laugh. My father has always had this, the capacity to produce, even in difficult moments, the precise sentence that punctures the drama without diminishing the reality. It was one of the things I loved most about him. It was one of the things I forgot how much I had missed until I heard him do it again. We'll talk about everything when you're feeling better, I say. Not everything, he says. Not tonight. Not tonight, I agree. He closes his eyes. His hand doesn't release mine. The monitor does its small, even rhythm. Somewhere down the corridor, the night shift is doing what night shifts do. The quiet industry of care that continues regardless of what has just happened in one patient's room. I sit in the chair beside his bed, holding his hand in the blue hospital dark, and I let the room be exactly what it is. He is alive. He is here. Tonight, nothing is taken. That is enough for tonight. The thing about a plan interrupted is that it doesn't disappear. It reconfigures. I know this because I have watched Diane Fowler for 48 hours since the hospital room. Watched her the way you watch something at the edge of your field of vision, not looking directly, because direct looking changes what you see. She is careful, and she knows I am watching, and she is doing what careful people do when their first approach is blocked. She is finding the angle. She calls me Wednesday afternoon. I think we should talk, she says. Her voice is the register she uses when she is reaching for warmth, a conscious warmth, control deployed at moments requiring it. I agree, I say. She suggests the house on Ridgecrest Road, which is her house now in the legal sense, which means she has the standing to make the invitation. I accept. I drive over Thursday morning. In my bag, my phone, with the recording application my colleague Patrick recommended to me years ago, which I installed Tuesday night. In my head, the recording app activated before I parked the car and put the phone in my jacket pocket. I am aware that the laws around consent to record vary by state, and that North Carolina is a one-party consent state, which means that I am the one party present, and the recording is legal. I confirmed this with Margaret Osey on Wednesday evening. Diane has made coffee. This is the specific detail I noticed first. The coffee, made and poured into actual mugs, on the kitchen table that my father bought at an estate sale 15 years ago, and that still has the ink stain on one end from the summer I left a pen uncapped on it. The coffee is good. She is a good coffee maker. This is the kind of thing that makes people complicated rather than simple. We sit across the table from each other. She begins with the approach I expected, the language of reasonableness. I want you to know that I care about your father deeply, she says, and I want what's best for this family. I know you do, I say. The recording is running. I am the most patient woman in the world. What happened Tuesday night? She pauses. She is choosing her words. I think there was a misunderstanding. I simply wanted to make sure Raymond's wishes were documented in a way that reflected our life together. His wishes were documented Monday morning, I say, with Philip Garrett. Yes, she wraps both hands around her mug. I saw the document. Good, I say. Then you understand that his wishes are clear. She looks at me. There is a shift in her expression that I have been waiting for, a very small one, a closing of something that was performatively open. She has decided that warmth is not the instrument that is going to work here. Claire, she says, I have given 3 years of my life to this family, to your father. I have been here through the diagnosis, through the mobility issues, through the cognitive changes that I have not told you the full extent of, because I didn't want you to worry. I have managed his medications, his appointments, his social calendar. I have been here every day. I know you have, I say. And the estate as it currently stands leaves me with nothing, she says. If Raymond were to die, I would have no security. I would have the contents of a checking account, and whatever I can claim under North Carolina spousal inheritance law, which is not. She stops. She is being more explicit than she planned to be. How much? I ask. Pardon. How much were you planning to keep? If the revision had gone through Monday night? She is quiet for a moment. This is the moment, I think, where the recording earns its keep. I wasn't keeping anything, she says. It would have been Raymond's estate, handled according to a will that reflected the reality of his current life, which includes a wife who has taken care of him. And what would have happened to the existing beneficiaries, I ask? To me, to Marjorie, to the foundation. Another pause. The estate would have been restructured, she says. How? She picks up her mug. She puts it down. She says, I think we should talk about a compromise. And here it is. Here is the reconfiguration, the plan that replaced the midnight notarization when the midnight notarization was blocked. What kind of compromise, I ask? She outlines it with the precision of someone who has thought about it for at least 2 days. A revised arrangement in which the Asheville property, the house, is held in trust for Diane for the duration of her life, then passes to me. in which the Raleigh property is converted to a jointly held LLC with Diane as primary beneficiary on Raymond's death, in which a portion, she says a reasonable portion, without specifying the number, of the brokerage account is transferred to Diane through a separate instrument. And in exchange, I ask. In exchange, she says, I would not pursue a contest of the existing will on grounds of undue influence by external parties. I let the silence sit for a moment, not because I'm considering it, because I want her to hear what she just said. You would contest the existing will, I say, on grounds of undue influence. It's a possibility that my attorney has. By external parties, I say. Meaning me. She doesn't answer. I am looking at my coffee mug. My father's kitchen. The ink stain on the table. The window over the sink that looks out to the backyard, where the oak tree is still standing, still there, not yet cut down. The tire swing he hung for me at age 7, still looped around one of the lower branches, even though I have not been a child in this house for decades. I'm going to decline, I say. Her voice does not change in any registrable way. That's unfortunate, she says. It is, I agree. I pick up my bag. I stand up. At the door, I turn back. Diane, I say, I want to be clear about something. What you just offered me, the quid pro quo, the threat of contesting the existing will, the specific framing of what would be in it for me to stay quiet, that conversation is on record. Everything you said this morning is documented. I let that land. I would recommend speaking to Derek Holloway about the range of possible outcomes. She is very still. I leave. I sit in my car in the driveway for approximately 90 seconds. Then I drive away. The oak tree is in my rearview mirror until it isn't. I drive on Ridgecrest Road toward the intersection with Merrimont, and at the intersection I do not turn left toward the apartment. I turn right toward the city, and I drive for a while without destination. This is something I do when I need to let the body do something while the mind works through what just happened. What just happened is this. I walked into a kitchen with a phone in my pocket, and I walked out with a recording of a woman threatening to contest a will on grounds of undue influence, a will she had been planning to circumvent for 8 months, as leverage for a financial settlement. In legal terms, this is extortion. The word is not overstatement. What she described, payment for silence about a threatened legal action, is extortion, and I have it on audio, and I have a law degree worth of context for understanding what that means, which is a great deal. The plan, when I began, was to protect the estate. The documents with Philip Garrett, the medical advocate designation, the chart note with Dr. Huang, the will secured and photographed, the bar complaint for Derek Holloway. These were the instruments. The recording is something else. The recording is the thing that transforms a civil matter into the kind of documented record that no attorney will want to defend against in court. The recording is what makes the divorce when it comes, not a negotiation between equals, but a capitulation. I did not plan the recording as the centerpiece. I planned it as a backup, a document for the file. But Diane made it the centerpiece by giving me exactly what she gave me, the explicit offer, the explicit threat, the explicit framing of what the silence was worth to her. She was good enough to believe she was in control of the room. I think that is the only explanation. She genuinely believed she still had leverage, that the blocking of Tuesday night had been a setback rather than a terminus. She believed I would calculate the costs and find the settlement preferable to the fight. She was right that I would calculate the costs. She was wrong about what I would find. I drive for 15 minutes. Then I drive back. The oak tree comes back into view as I turn onto Ridgecrest Road. I pass the house without stopping. I drive to the apartment. I park. I sit in the parking space and I take my phone out and I confirm that the recording has backed up to the cloud. And then I text Margaret Osei 3 words. I have it. Her response comes in 11 seconds. Office at high. The original will. In my first life, the original will was never found. The fireproof safe in my father's study, a gray Sentry safe, model number Mot Hai, which he had bought in Motnin Chinchin Mitam, and which contained, among other things, the title to the Raleigh property, his marriage certificate to my mother, a folder of tax documents, and the Hai Kong Le Hai will, was empty of the will when Philip Garrett asked to review it after my father's death. Diane reported it had not been there when she looked. No will. No explanation. I have thought about what happened to it. I am not in a position to prove what I think happened. I am never going to be able to prove it with the certainty of direct evidence. But I know, from a conversation that happened 11 years after my father's death, at the funeral of a woman named Charlotte Reeves, who was Diane's closest friend in the years after Raymond died, that the subject came up. I was there for Charlotte's funeral because Charlotte's husband, James Reeves, had been a professional colleague of my father's, and Aunt Marjorie wanted to pay respects. I did not expect Diane to be there. She was. She and I stood 6 feet from each other in the receiving line and did not speak. But afterward, in the parking lot, I overheard two women talking about Diane, not knowing I could hear them, and one of them said, "She always said the hard part was not the timing, it was having to handle the paperwork before the ambulance got there." The ambulance. My father was taken to the hospital from home after showing symptoms of a pulmonary embolism. Diane called the ambulance. Between the moment she recognized the symptoms and the moment the ambulance arrived, there was approximately 12 minutes. I have thought about 12 minutes. In this life, I don't need to prove what happened to the original will. I need to secure the original will before anything can happen to it. I know where it is. It is in the sentry safe in the second floor study, the room that was my father's office for 30 years, that has watercolor paintings he made leaning against every wall surface because he ran out of wall surface to hang them on. The safe is on the bottom shelf of the built-in bookcase on the left wall. The combination is my mother's birthday, Kom Hai Hai, which my father has used as a combination for everything since Morton Chin Cham Tami Mot. I cannot remove the will from the safe myself. That is not the right move. Removing documents from a safe that is not mine would be theft and would undermine the very legal integrity I'm trying to establish. What I can do is have Philip Garrett formally request access to the safe's contents as part of a comprehensive review of Raymond's estate documents, requested by Raymond on the record. I call Philip Thursday morning after I leave Diane's. "Philip," I say, "my father needs to formally request that you review the contents of the estate document safe at the house. All contents. Before he is discharged from the hospital." Philip is quiet for a moment. He has 20 years of reading between lines. "Is there a specific concern about the safe's contents?" "I want to make sure that everything is where it should be," I say, "while it can still be verified." Another pause. "I'll contact Raymond today," he says. My father, from his hospital room on Thursday afternoon, calls Diane and tells her that Philip Garrett will be coming to the house on Friday morning to review the estate documents. He tells her he has requested this himself as part of ensuring his affairs are in order before discharge. He tells her in the precise, affectionate tone he uses for direct communications, the tone that does not invite extended discussion. She says, "Of course." Philip and Sandra, his paralegal, arrive at the house on Friday morning. Diane is present. The safe is opened with the Konchin Hai Hai combination, which is in fact my father's password for things, and which Diane knows. The contents are inventoried: property title, marriage certificate, tax documents, and the Hain Kom Le Hai will. It is there. Of course it is there. We are on Friday, October Muri High. My father went into the hospital Monday. The will has not yet been touched. Philip photographs the will. He photographs the date on the safe, the contents laid out, the identifying markings on the will document. Sandra witnesses the inventory. A formal letter is drafted confirming the existence and location of the Hai Kom Le Hai will and the date of its verification. Philip takes the original. He places it in a sealed envelope, and his office will hold it in their document vault, which is the correct place for it, more secure than a household safe that any person with the combination can access at any time, in any 12-minute window before an ambulance arrives. He receipts it. He gives Diane a copy of the receipt. She signs it. I watch her sign it. Her signature is exactly what it always is in every document I ever saw her sign. A clean, controlled hand, the letters fully formed, no flourishes. She is a woman who signs things carefully, who produces documents carefully, who navigates legal and financial structures with the precision of someone who has learned the value of paperwork from experience. She would have been very good at running an estate. She understood property. She understood the instruments of security, the accounts, the deeds, the safe with the birthday combination. In another configuration of things, the version where she had come to my father without an attorney already retained and a plan already underway, she might have been a good steward of what he had built. I don't say any of this. It is not the kind of thing you say to someone while they are signing a receipt for an original will they were planning to remove from a fireproof safe. Diane watches all of this with the particular composure of a woman who understands that the game has changed in ways she is still calculating. What I know about the original will in my first life, and what I now think about, is this. In the window between my father's death on October 14th and Philip Garrett's formal request for the will, which happened on October 16th, 2 days after, 2 days in which the house was Diane's to move through alone, the will disappeared from the safe. The timing has always told me what I needed to know. Diane did not destroy the original will preemptively before Raymond died because she didn't know when he was going to die. The pulmonary embolism was not planned. Even I cannot believe she planned his death. But she was, in those 3 years of marriage, prepared. She had Derek Holloway on retainer. She had a revised will drafted and waiting. And when Raymond died in the early morning hours of October 14th, she had 2 days in which she was the only person in the house, 12 minutes before the ambulance. And 2 days after, that is the anatomy of what she did. In this life, none of that matters because Philip Garrett has photographed the original will on October 12th, and the photograph is in his records, and the will is in the safe, and my father is alive. I drive to the hospital Friday afternoon to sit with him. He is doing well. His hip is doing well. He is less soft around the edges today. The medication has been adjusted downward as the acute pain period passes, and he is more present, more himself. He has a watercolor sketchbook on the bed tray that Aunt Marjorie brought him, and he is working on something small and precise in the corner of a page. What are you painting? I ask. The window, he says. The light on the curtains. They have good curtains in this place. I look at the curtains. They are standard hospital curtains, a neutral beige stripe. The light coming through them is, I have to admit, a particular quality of afternoon light that I have been looking at for 2 days without noticing it. They're all right, I say. He adds a stroke of gray. How are things at the house? Things are fine, I say. Philip came by this morning. He nods. He keeps painting. Clary, he says, without looking up. What is it that Diane was trying to do Tuesday night? I have been waiting for this question since Tuesday night. I have thought about how to answer it, how much to say, how much to protect him from, how much he is ready to hear. I think, I say carefully, that she was trying to make sure her financial future was secure, in a way that wasn't consistent with what you told Philip you wanted. He is quiet for a moment. The small brush makes small, precise movements on the sketchbook page. She mentioned the estate to me a few times, he says. I told her I needed to think about it. She didn't wait, I say. Another pause. The brush stills. No, he says. I suppose she didn't. I reach over and put my hand on his. He turns his hand over and holds mine, the way he did Tuesday night, the same grip. What happens now? He asks. Now we make sure your wishes are protected, I say. That's all. You don't have to do anything differently. He looks at the window, at the curtains with the light through them. I thought she loved me, he says. Not accusatory. Not wounded in the sharp way. In the quiet way of a man who is doing the mathematics of a thing he doesn't want to add up. Maybe she does, I say. I think people can love people and still want things from them that they shouldn't take. He holds my hand for a long time. Outside, the October light moves down the face of the building across the street. Margaret O.C. files the formal complaint with the North Carolina State Bar in the third week of October. The complaint is specific. It documents the following sequence. Derek Holloway, an attorney with offices in Raleigh, appeared at Asheville Memorial Hospital at approximately Mimot, Concom PM on October Chin with the Notary Public, presenting estate revision documents for the signature of a patient who was on a documented post-operative pain management protocol, including opioid analgesia and sedative medications. The patient's designated medical advocate, me, had flagged in the patient's chart that such an approach was anticipated and had requested notification. The attending physician had been alerted. The patient's existing estate documents had been formally reviewed and confirmed the day of admission. The complaint notes that an attorney presenting legal documents to a hospitalized patient at Muyamot PM under those medication conditions, without the knowledge or presence of the patient's existing estate attorney, raises significant questions about the attorney's duty of care to a vulnerable client. The State Bar's response is not immediate. These things never are. But the process begins, and the process is a record, and the record is something that will live in Derek Holloway's professional file, regardless of the final finding. Margaret also refers the matter to an attorney she knows at the North Carolina Department of Justice, who handles elder financial exploitation. The referral does not produce an immediate investigation. What I described on its own is not yet sufficient for a criminal proceeding. But the referral is logged, and the conversation I recorded with Diane on Thursday morning, in which she made explicit reference to a proposed financial arrangement contingent on my silence, is noted as supplementary material. I also hire a forensic accountant. This is not something I knew to do in my first life. It is something I learned about in the third year of the legal battle, when Jana Kowalski brought in a financial expert to examine the estate records and found, too late, buried in the wrong part of the timeline, that Diane had made 2 transfers from a joint account she held with my father in the 6 weeks before his death, transfers to a private account in her sole name. Not enormous sums, $12,000 and $8,000 respectively, but transfers made during a period when my father's cognition was clearly compromised, without his apparent awareness, to an account he had no access to. In my first life, this was evidence of a pattern, but not enough to change the outcome. In this life, my father is alive, and the transfers have presumably already occurred, and they can be reversed, and the pattern they represent can be documented before it becomes historical. My father, from his hospital room, signs an authorization for his financial records to be reviewed by a forensic accountant retained by Philip Garrett. The accountant is a woman named Rebecca Chen, who works with Margaret Osie's office frequently in elder financial exploitation cases. Rebecca Chen's review identifies the 2 transfers. It also identifies a third one, smaller, in the previous month, that was in the records of my father's first life, but that I had never known about because by the time Jana Kowalski was examining the records, the account statements were incomplete. 3 transfers, $26,800 total, moved to a private account in Diane's name during a 12-week period when my father was experiencing elevated cognitive difficulty. Rebecca Chen is meticulous. She does not editorialize. She presents the transfers in a table, date, amount, originating account, receiving account, with the flat precision of someone who has been doing this work long enough to know that the facts are the argument. She includes a section titled Pattern Analysis, which notes, without characterization, that the transfers correspond temporally with a period during which Mr. Ashworth's primary care physician had noted in his clinical records elevated concern about medication-related cognitive symptoms. My father's primary care physician was a man named Dr. Leonard Hughes, who had been seeing my father for 12 years, and who had noted in June, July, and August of this year, in clinical language that was careful and measured, and that I had never known about in the first life, because the records were not subpoenaed until after the estate was lost, that Raymond was showing increased compliance suggestibility during high pain periods, and that caregiver influence on clinical decision-making had been discussed with the patient's wife on 2 occasions. Caregiver influence on clinical decision-making. That is what the medical record says. Philip Garrett reads this sentence, and he puts the report down on his desk, and he looks at me over his reading glasses for a moment. I wish I had known about Dr. Hughes's notes, he says quietly. I know, I say. In the first life, he never had them. No one asked for them in time. By the time anyone thought to ask, the statute of limitations on what they would have supported had narrowed, and the estate was gone, and it was too late. In this life, Rebecca Chen has the records, and Philip has the table of transfers, and Margaret Osie has the recording from Thursday morning. And when we bring all of it to my father at the kitchen table with the ink stain, the shape of what Diane did is complete and documented and inarguable. We present this to my father on a Monday. We present this to my father on a Monday, not at the hospital, he has been discharged by then, but at the kitchen table with the ink stain in the yellow countertop kitchen, with Philip Garrett and Aunt Marjorie present. My father looks at the account statements for a long time. He is not a man who raises his voice. He is not a man who performs his anger. He folds his hands on the table, and he is quiet for what feels like a very long time, and then he says to Philip, I want her to return the money, and I want to talk to a divorce attorney. Philip nods. He says, Of course, Raymond. Derek Holloway, meanwhile, does not make things easy for himself. It turns out that what happened with my father is not the first time Derek Holloway has brought documents to a hospitalized client at unusual hours. The state bar complaint, once filed, triggers a review process, and the review process surfaces 2 prior complaints that were never formally actioned. One from Hai Kong Mai Sao, one from Hai Kong Mai Chin, both involving estate document revisions executed with elderly clients in conditions that other parties subsequently questioned. The bar's investigator calls Margaret Osie in November. The investigation is formal now. It will take time. These things always take time, but it is real. I am not in the room for any of these proceedings. I am not the complainant in any formal legal sense. Margaret Osie is, as an officer of the court, and Philip Garrett has his own correspondence to the bar based on his professional observations. I am the daughter. I am the one who made the appointments and kept the records and sat in the hospital room on Tuesday night and blocked the door. That is the right amount of involvement. The machinery works better when you set it in motion correctly and then let it run. Diane retains a divorce attorney by the end of October. She does not contest the formal demand to return the transferred funds. Rebecca Chen's documentation makes contesting impractical. She returns $26,800 to my father's account in a wire transfer on October 29th. The transfer comes with no attached note. My father receives the transfer notification on his phone. He shows it to me on a Sunday afternoon. He looks at it for a moment, then puts the phone down on the kitchen table and picks up his coffee cup and looks out the window at the backyard. I don't know how I didn't see it, he says. You trusted her, I say. That's the same thing, he says. No, I say. It isn't. He looks at me. His eyes are the same eyes, the ones that I know from every age, from childhood on. They are tired this morning, but they are clear. He is here. He is present. Tell me something nice, he says. I look out at the backyard, the oak tree, the tire swing, the vegetable garden that has gone to seed for the autumn, that will be turned over in the spring. The Appalachian Water Foundation broke ground on a new well system in Avery County last week, I say. I read about it. 1,200 people who didn't have reliable water access. They'll have it by spring. He is quiet. Then, your mother would have liked that. I know, I say. I think she's why he put them in the will. He reaches across the table and pats my hand twice, the way he has always done it. Twice, a period at the end of a sentence. The divorce proceedings will take 8 months. The bar complaint will produce a 6-month suspension of Derek Holloway's license, which is not everything, but is something. The recording from the Thursday morning kitchen conversation will be noted in a civil suit that Philip Garrett's office files on my father's behalf, a suit that results in a settlement in the spring. None of this matters as much as the oak tree outside the window and my father's coffee cup and the fact that this Sunday morning exists. But it matters. My father does not know everything I know. He knows that Diane attempted to revise his will without his informed consent. He knows about the financial transfers. He knows that the night of October 9th, an attorney arrived at the hospital with documents that should not have been there. He knows that his daughter canceled a professional conference in Edinburgh and came home and put a series of careful instruments in place to protect him. He does not know that in another version of this story, he died on October 14th, alone in the early morning hours, and that his estate was taken, and that his daughter spent 18 years in an apartment she couldn't afford to leave, watching the arithmetic of her life shrink steadily from what it was supposed to be. He does not know that I woke up on a kitchen floor at 52 and did not get up. This is the weight I carry alone. It is not a weight I would share with him. Not because it would frighten him. My father has always been better with difficult information than most people. But because the specific quality of grief that comes from living through a loss is not something that transfers in words. It changes the person who experienced it in ways that cannot be explained to the person who didn't. You can say, I lost you in the house in 18 years. But those words are not the thing. The thing is only knowable through the living. What I can tell him is what is true in this life as well, that I love him, that I am here, and that some things are worth fighting for in a way that requires you to be fierce, even when fierceness doesn't come naturally. There is one conversation I have to have with him that I have been postponing. It is the conversation where I tell him what Diane was going to do. Not what she did. The transfers are documented, he knows those. Not what the attorney attempted at the hospital. He was there, he saw. The thing I want to tell him is the plan. The full shape of it. The attorney retained 8 months before, the timing of the night, the choice to move when she did, the specific architecture of the exploitation. I postpone it because telling him makes it real in a different way than he currently understands it to be real. What he currently holds is, my wife did something wrong in a moment of fear or selfishness. What the full picture contains is, my wife was planning this before I was sick. That is a different wound. I tell him on a Sunday in November, 3 weeks after the divorce attorney's first meeting, after the transfers have been returned, after the initial filing has been made. We are in the kitchen again. We are always in the kitchen. This is the room of difficult things in our family. The room where my mother told him about the diagnosis. The room where he told me she was gone. The room where I am about to do this. I have been thinking about how to have this conversation since October. Not the words exactly. My father has never needed careful wording from me, has always been a man who would rather have the plain version than the cushioned one. What I've been thinking about is whether to have it at all. There is a version of this, a version I considered and ultimately rejected, in which I do not tell him about the architecture of what Diane did, in which I let him believe it was a moment of weakness, a flash of fear from a woman who panicked about her financial future and made a bad choice in a bad moment. The version in which the marriage ends on the grounds of the financial transfers alone, which are provable and documented, without the full picture of the 8-month retainer and the planned 11 p.m. approach. That version is gentler. It protects him from the specific knowledge that the woman he wore his blue suit for had been building toward this before the hospitalization, had been planning it with the same methodical care that he brought to engineering projects and that I bring to structural assessments. The knowledge that it was a plan is heavier than the knowledge that it was a mistake. I rejected that version because I do not want to know something he doesn't know. Because keeping information from my father to protect him is a form of the condescension that diminishes people, and my father has never been diminished by the truth, only by the absence of it. And because I am the one with the recording, and the recording belongs to both of us, and withholding it would be a kind of theft of a different kind. So the kitchen on a Sunday in November. I do not have the full evidence of the prior timeline. What I have is the evidence of this one, the bar complaint, the forensic accountant's report, the recording. I play him the recording. He listens to it on my phone with his reading glasses on, though listening does not require glasses. And I think he puts them on because they are armor of a kind, something to look through so that you don't have to show your whole face while you hear something difficult. Diane's voice is very clear on the recording. The kitchen has good acoustics. She says, the estate as it currently stands leaves me with nothing. She says, reasonable portion. She says, I would not pursue a contest of the existing will on grounds of undue influence by external parties. He listens to the whole thing without stopping it. When it ends, he takes off his glasses and puts them on the table. She had a lawyer for 8 months, I say, before you were ever in the hospital. He nods slowly. The night at the hospital, she planned that. The timing, the medication protocol, the late hour. She knew when the night nurse would be reduced. She knew what your pain management looked like at 11 p.m. He is very still. Not the stillness of shock. He has been moving toward this understanding for weeks, and the movement of grief often looks like stillness from the outside. It is the stillness of a man completing a calculation he has been doing in private. She told me she'd looked into it, he says. The estate. For she said for peace of mind. He turns his coffee mug in slow circles on the table. She called it peace of mind. I know, I say. I should have told her no, he says. I should have told her the will was settled. You did tell her, I say. You told Philip this morning. On record. He shakes his head. Not in disagreement. In the specific motion of a man who is doing something to his own guilt that he doesn't have language for. Dad, I say. You trusted her. That's not a mistake on your part. That's what happens when you trust someone and they make a plan out of it. He is quiet for a long time. The coffee mug goes around and around in his hands. You know what I keep thinking about, he says. The suit I wore to the wedding, a pause. Your mother's funeral suit. I don't say anything. There is nothing that needs to be said. I thought wearing it meant something, he says. That I was. I don't know. Bringing her along. Telling her I was going to be all right. He stops. Turns out I just wore a suit. You brought her along, I say. That's what you wanted it to mean, and that's what it meant. The suit is a suit. What you put into it is yours. He looks at me across the table. The same eyes. My father's eyes that I have been looking at my whole life. I'm glad you came home, he says. I'm glad I came home, I say. We sit in the kitchen for a while without talking, and the coffee cools in the mugs, and the November light does the thing it does through the yellow curtained window, and outside the backyard is turning toward winter, the garden empty, the oak tree bare now, the tire swing moving slightly in the cold. He gets smaller after that. I want to be accurate. He does not break. He does not retreat. He continues to paint his watercolors and read his newspaper and complain about the hip rehabilitation exercises with the specific irritable energy of a man who knows the exercises are necessary and finds them annoying anyway. He is by any external measure fine, but some quality of lightness in him is different. The quality that came from trusting unconditionally, from moving through the world without the particular alertness that says, be careful. That quality is gone. It was a beautiful thing in him, and now it is absent, and something more careful has taken its place. And the more careful thing is appropriate and right, and is also undeniably a loss. He trusted people. He trusted Diane. And when I showed him what she had done with the trust itself became something he couldn't fully access anymore. This is the cost I knew was coming. The one I knew I was going to have to live with when I chose to tell him. The one I chose anyway, because the alternative, letting him remain in the marriage without knowing, was not something I could hold. Some truths are necessary even when they diminish. The week after the Sunday conversation, he calls me on a Wednesday afternoon. This is unusual. He calls on Sundays and Tuesdays, never Wednesdays, and I answer quickly. I've been thinking, he says, in the voice he uses for things he has been working through on his own. I know, I say. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, he says. The Diane thing. I don't want it to be a long project. A pause. It already was a long project, yours for years in the other direction. I don't want to do that to myself. You don't have to, I say. No, he says. I don't. Another pause. I'm going to think about it as a finished thing, something that happened and is now complete and will not have an ongoing life in me. I've had other things happen that I've had to put in that category. This is one of those. I think about my mother, about the 11 years he grieved her before the grief support group, and the way he managed the grief, not by suppressing it, but by finding a form for it that could coexist with the rest of his life. He was always in some way an expert in this, the art of carrying things without being consumed by them. That seems like a good approach, I say. I think so, he says. I also think, he stops. He is choosing something. I think the part that will take longer is the part about my own judgment, about the fact that I didn't see it. Dad, let me finish, he says. I'm not saying I blame myself for it. I don't think I should have been more suspicious of a person I married in good faith. But there is a thing that comes after you have trusted wrongly, a kind of audit of your own reliability as a judge of people, which is uncomfortable to sit with, and I am currently sitting with it. That makes sense, I say. What I am going to do with it, he says, is not resolve it into false confidence. I am not going to tell myself I am still a good judge of people as a compensation. I am going to live with the uncertainty for a while, until it becomes just a fact rather than a wound. I am quiet for a moment. Marjorie was right. He has always been better with difficult information than most people. That's very wise, I say. It's very old, he says. These things look the same from the outside. He says goodbye. He says, call on Tuesday. He knows, and I am here with him while he carries it, which is the only thing I can do, and it has to be enough. The divorce is finalized in June, 8 months after Raymond's hip surgery. It is not contentious in the end. Contentious would require Diane to have a defensible position, and the combination of the bar complaint, the forensic accountant's report, and the recording from the Thursday kitchen conversation has produced a situation in which her attorney's primary occupation is minimizing exposure rather than maximizing settlement. She leaves the marriage with what she came into it with: a checking account, her personal effects, a settlement amount that covers her legal fees, and provides 6 months of living costs, which is considerably less than what she planned to walk away with. Her attorney sends a letter to Margaret Osey in March, proposing a settlement figure that is substantially higher than what she ends up receiving. Margaret Osey responds with a detailed accounting of the documented financial transfers, the bar complaint, the forensic report, and the recording transcript, and proposes that the conversation about settlement amounts would benefit from Diane's counsel, having a complete picture of what would be presented in court if the matter proceeded to litigation. The settlement figure in Diane's next proposal drops by 60%. The gap between what Diane expected to walk away with, the estate she had planned for 18 months, and what she walks away with is not something I celebrate. It is not a number that produces satisfaction. The numbers that matter to me are different: the estate intact, the will unchanged, the house still standing. The positive things rather than the reduced thing. I do not hear from Diane directly during the proceedings. I receive one voicemail in April, 4 months after the hospitalization, from a number I recognize as hers. I do not play it immediately. I sit with the phone in my hand for a moment, and I think about what I would want her to say, and I think about whether I believe she would say it. I play the voicemail. She says, Claire, I know this is, a pause. I hope Raymond is doing well. I hope you both are, another pause. I know what I did. I want you to know I know it. That is all. I play it twice. I do not return the call. I show it to Philip Garrett, who notes it in the file as possible evidentiary material, and then, when the settlement is complete, removes it to archive. What I want to believe about it, that it was real, that she knew. What I actually believe, both things. People can know what they've done, and have done it anyway. People are more complicated than the things they do, and the things they do are still what they did. She moves to Sarasota anyway. I know this because Aunt Marjorie tells me. She tracked it for a while, she said, and then stopped, because tracking it was taking energy that could go somewhere better. I agree with this assessment. I stopped tracking Diane the day the divorce was finalized, and I have not done it since. There is a specific moment, about a year after the divorce is finalized, when I realize I have stopped thinking about her every day. This happens with grief and with anger, and apparently it can happen with the particular sustained alertness of having fought someone. The way it finally, without announcement, stops being the first thing in the morning. I am at the kitchen table in the apartment I am still in for another 6 months before I leave for Denver, and I am reading something for work. And I realize at some point during the reading that an entire hour has passed in which Diane Fowler did not occur to me. This is not a triumph. It is just a measure. The thing I fought over 3 years in the first life to process, the letting go of it, or rather the releasing of its centrality, happens in this life in a year. Whether that is because the fight here had an outcome, or because the second chance has given me a different relationship to loss, I cannot say. Probably both. Aunt Marjorie handles it her own way. She calls on Tuesdays for the first year, longer calls than usual, and we talk around it more than we talk about it. The way our family has always handled the things that hurt, which is obliquely, circling the wound without naming it directly, but also never pretending it isn't there. She says once, "You did a good thing, Claire, just that." Just once. I say, "He's still here." She says, "Yes, he is." Derek Holloway's 6-month license suspension begins in February. His other estate cases are under review. I do not follow the details closely. That piece of the story belongs to other families, other elderly patients, other hours, other hospitals, and it will work out or it won't without my involvement. My father turns 72 in March. We have a party. Small, 14 people, which is almost exactly the same number as the wedding. And I think about this, and then I think, that's all right. The number of people who love you does not have to be large to be the right amount. Aunt Marjorie brings a lemon cake, which she has been making for family celebrations for 40 years. A friend of my father's from the watercolor group brings a painting he made of the Ridgecrest Roadhouse, the front porch, the wisteria on the left side, afternoon light. My father hangs it in the study between two of his own paintings, as though it belongs there, which it does. The hip is not perfect, but it is better. He walks from the car to the grocery store without stopping twice. He walks from the house to the end of the street and back in the mornings, slowly, with the specific deliberateness of a man who is choosing to do it rather than waiting to feel like it. He paints more than he ever has. There is something about the last 3 years of my father's life in this telling, the 3 years I got back, that I find genuinely hard to describe. Not because they are tragic, because they are not tragic. Because they are ordinary in the specific way that ordinary things are when you have lost them once, and then they are returned to you and you understand what they are worth. He calls me on Tuesdays. We talk about the watercolor group, about the hip, about the news, about the Appalachian Water Foundation, which he has started donating to annually in amounts that are modest but consistent. He asks about my work. I changed firms. With the estate intact, the down payment I needed became available, and with a stable financial footing, the Denver contract became possible, and I took it, and the bridge rehabilitation project in Colorado turned out to be genuinely important, and I am proud of the work. I tell him about the project. He asks good questions. He always asks good questions. The Denver contract is 2 years, working on water infrastructure in underserved communities in rural Colorado. Exactly the work Priyanka described to me in Haing Chin, in the life that already happened, the work I said no to because the timing was not right and the margin was not there. In this life, the timing is not much better. My father is 2 months out of surgery. The divorce is not finalized. The bar investigation is in its early stages. But the margin is there. The estate is there. The knowledge that I have already once made the choice to stay when I should have gone, and lived 18 years with the shape of that choice, is there. I call Priyanka. It takes me one breath to decide and 3 sentences to say yes. She says, "I was going to call you again this year. I kept thinking you'd take it eventually." "What made you think that?" I ask. "You're the kind of person who takes things eventually," she says. "It just takes you a while to run out of reasons to wait." She is not wrong. But she doesn't know about the kitchen floor, and she doesn't know about the 18 years, and she doesn't know that I am not the person who takes things eventually anymore. I am the person who already lived the eventually and knows what it costs. I sign the contract on a Tuesday. I tell my father on the Sunday before I leave. He is in his study, the room with watercolors leaning against every surface, and he looks at me over his reading glasses with the specific expression he reserves for news he considers good but wants to think about before he says so. "Colorado," he says. "Colorado," I say. "Your mother always wanted to see the Rockies," he says. I know. He takes his glasses off. He puts them on the desk. He says, "Are you going to be all right?" And by this he means, I know this because I have known him my whole life, not the practical all right, the finances and the logistics. He means the other thing, the question beneath the question. "I'm going to be better than all right," I say. He nods. He picks up the glasses again. He is not going to make this sentimental. That has never been his mode. He says, well, don't forget to call on Tuesdays. I'll call on Tuesdays, I say. I call on Tuesdays for 2 years from Denver, where the project is exactly as hard and exactly as meaningful as Priyanka said it would be. I work on a water system that serves 1,200 people in Avery County, the same county the Appalachian Water Foundation funds a well system in, which I discover 3 months into the project, and which makes me laugh in the kind of way you laugh when things line up in ways you didn't plan. I tell my father about it on a Tuesday. He says, well, your mother. And that is the whole sentence. That is the whole thing. He comes to Denver once in his second year of my contract, when the hip is well enough and his friend from the watercolor group is willing to drive him to the airport. He stays for 4 days. We go to the mountains. He paints the light on the Rockies in the specific small, precise way he paints everything, and I sit beside him on a folding chair with a thermos of coffee and watch the light move. He dies on a Saturday morning in March, of the pulmonary embolism that was perhaps always coming, the same condition, the same quiet deterioration that had been building before the surgery. This time, he is not alone when the ambulance arrives. His neighbor called Chin Mamot at Bay AM when she came to check in on him as she does every Saturday, a routine she and my father established after Diane left. He reaches the hospital alive. He is conscious and clear for most of the morning. Aunt Marjorie and I are there by noon. He is not in pain. The hospital is the same one. Asheville Memorial, the fourth floor. I know these corridors from the hip surgery, from the days I spent here in October 3 years ago, from the night I stood in the hallway and watched Derek Holloway walk to the elevator. The corridors are the same institutional color. The nurses are different. The smell is the same, antiseptic and something warmer underneath, something human. Marjorie holds his hand in the morning. She talks to him about the things she has always talked to him about, the family, the small accumulation of news, the things that happened over the years. She tells him about my mother, the specific way they are alike, she says, in the way they both stayed quiet when something delighted them before they smiled, as though they needed a moment to verify the delight was real. My father listens to this with his eyes closed and a very slight movement at the corner of his mouth. I sit in the window for a while in the afternoon. The light is doing what light does in hospital rooms in March in Asheville, a particular quality of late winter sun, the kind that has not yet fully committed to warmth but is beginning to remember it. I look at it. I think about the watercolor sketchbook he left at the house. I think he would have painted this. We talk in the afternoon, not about important things, or rather the important things don't announce themselves as important. He asks me about a specific bridge in the Colorado project, a question he has been thinking about since my last Tuesday call, a question about the load-bearing distribution on the eastern span. I answer it carefully, the way I would answer any engineering question, and he nods with the specific nod of a man who is checking his understanding and finding it correct. Good, he says. I thought that was how it worked. It is, I say. Your mother would have liked that project, he says. I know, I say. I keep thinking that. He is quiet for a moment. The monitor does its small, regular sound. Tell me about the mountains, he says. Which part? Any part. So I tell him. The Rockies in October, when I first got there. The specific quality of the light at altitude, which is cleaner than anywhere I've been. A light without the slight softness that humidity gives it in North Carolina. The scale of the mountains, which photographs do not prepare you for. The morning I drove out to the project site in the early dark and watched the light come up over the Continental Divide and thought, this is what you get when you go to the thing. He listens with his eyes closed. His breathing is even, though slower than it should be. Marjorie has stepped out to get coffee. The room is the two of us and the light. Good, he says when I stop talking. He dies at Bombay in the afternoon, with the afternoon light coming through the hospital curtains the way it does. That particular quality of late-day light that he would have painted if he'd had a sketchbook and the strength. I hold his hand. He says, the light's good, Clary. I say, I know, Dad. He says, good. And that is the last thing. The estate passes as the High Comlehai will specified. The house on Ridgecrest Road does not get sold to a developer. I live in it, which was not my original plan and was not something I planned in my first life, but which turns out to be the right decision in the specific way that some decisions are right in ways you can't calculate ahead of time. I live in it and I repaint the kitchen, the yellow countertops finally replaced after 30 years with something my mother would have liked, a warm white clean, the color of good intentions. I keep the oak tree. I keep the tire swing. I turn over the vegetable garden in the spring, the way my father turned it over every spring, and I plant the things he always planted. Tomatoes, green beans, the particular kind of basil that my mother used in everything. The Raleigh property produces income that over time becomes the thing that makes the rest of the choices possible. The brokerage account becomes a foundation, a small private one in my father's and mother's names that contributes annually to the Appalachian Water Foundation and to two other organizations my father mentioned over the years. It is not glamorous. It is not the dramatic reversal of a dramatic wrong. It is what should have happened, quietly, in the way that things that are right tend to be quiet. I want to tell you about the Sunday mornings. My father and I had Sunday mornings at the house on Ridgecrest Road for 3 years after the divorce, after the legal proceedings. After the smaller man, he became settled into the new shape of himself. We had coffee on the front porch when the weather allowed it, which in Asheville is more often than you'd think. He would bring his sketchbook. I would bring the newspaper. We would exist in the same space without needing to fill it, which is a particular quality of comfort that only comes from having known someone long enough. He was different after Diane. I have said this. I have said he became smaller. But I want to be precise. He was also in a way that surprised me clearer. The quality of his attention, on his paintings, on our conversations, on the particular light of Sunday mornings, was sharper than it had been in the years of the marriage, as though something that had been drawing resources away from him had been removed, and what remained was concentrated, more purely himself. He said once, on a Sunday without preamble, as though continuing a conversation we'd been having internally, "I think about your mother a lot lately," not with sadness, just as though she's nearby. I looked at him. The light was coming through the maple at the edge of the porch, the leaves just turning. "I think she probably is," I said. He looked at the maple. He had the sketchbook open on the armrest of his chair, but he wasn't painting, just holding the brush, watching the light move. "Do you remember," he said, "the morning she told me about the diagnosis? We were right here, on this porch. October." He paused. The light was doing that. I didn't know this. He had never told me this, not in the first life, not in the years after. The kitchen was the room where he had told me she was gone, and I had always thought of the porch as a neutral place, unclaimed by specific grief. "What did she say?" I asked. "She said, we're going to be very economical with our worry." He smiled at the maple. She always was. Even at the end. She'd say, "I've allocated 15 minutes for this worry, and then I'm going to go do something useful." And she would. He picked up the brush again. He made a small stroke on the sketchbook page. The beginning of the light through the maple, I thought. Or maybe just a test stroke. With my father, the painting started so small and so privately that you could never tell at the beginning what they would become. "She would have liked you very much," he said. "The version of you I'm watching right now. The one who came home." I held my coffee mug with both hands. "I know," I said. He considered this. He picked up his watercolor brush. "I think I'm ready," he said. Not in a dramatic way. In the way of someone who has finished something they were working on and is setting it down. I didn't say anything. I looked at the maple and the light. I thought about 18 years and the kitchen floor in March and the pothos plant I never watered again. I thought about the tire swing and the yellow countertops and the first cup of coffee I ever made in the house after the estate was settled. "I'm not ready," I said. He put his hand over mine. Twice. The period. "I know," he said. "You never have to be ready. You just have to be here. I am 37 when he dies. I am not the woman who died on a kitchen floor at 52. I am not that version of Claire Ashworth, the one who lived in the same apartment for 18 years, who didn't take the contract in Denver, who kept a photograph of the Christmas morning house as proof of something that was gone. I am also not her. She is in me, the 18 years of her knowledge, the specific quality of grief that shaped every decision I made from the morning I woke up at 34 to the afternoon my father died. I made every choice I made because she had already lived the consequences of the other choices. She was the cost. I am the result. Neither of us is quite complete without the other. The estate is in order. The house is standing. The Appalachian Water Foundation has a new well system in Avery County. The tire swing is on the oak tree. I sit on the front porch on a Sunday morning in April, 4 weeks after my father is gone, with the coffee that is too strong, because I still make it the way he taught me. Too strong, always too strong. And the light is doing the thing it does through the maple, and the sketchbook is on the table beside me. Not mine, his, the one from the hospital room. I open it. The last thing he painted in the hospital room in October, the first hospitalization. The one that matters, the window, the light on the curtains. Hospital beige, standard issue, the particular quality of afternoon light coming through fabric that doesn't know it's beautiful. He was right. The curtains were good. I put the sketchbook down. I pick up the coffee. The porch wraps around to the left, the way it always has, and the wisteria is beginning to come in on the trellis, and the morning is quiet in the specific way of mornings that are asking nothing from you. This is finally enough. It is not what I wanted. I wanted my father to live longer. I wanted him not to have been married to someone who brought a notary to his bedside at 11 in the evening. I wanted the 3 years we got to be 20 years or 40. I wanted my mother not to have died at all, which is a want so far from possible that it has always lived in a different category from normal wanting. But this, the house, the morning, the coffee that is too strong, the light through the maple, the sketchbook with the hospital curtains, this is what there is. This is what the second chance produced. Not the first life with its losses repaired, because losses don't repair, they integrate. Not a different person, because I am not a different person. I am the same person who died on a kitchen floor, carrying 18 years of knowledge in a 34-year-old body. I am correctly placed, in the house where I grew up, on the porch where my parents used to sit, with the estate intact, and the trees still standing, and the foundation contributing annually, and my father 3 weeks in the ground, and my aunt calling on Tuesday mornings and the sketchbook open beside me. Here, finally here. That is what the second life gave me. Not everything I lost, everything I kept. End.